It starts with a simple question and ends in objective reality. Through our journey from there to here, we find one another and ourselves. And as the next 24 hours breaks free from our last, we gaze onward in reflection of the day.
Come to your own conclusions.
Stay vigilant.
Welcome to the Daily Wrap-Up.
Saturday, August 23rd, 2025. Thank you for joining me today. I think today's show is important. I put off a lot of different things I was going to include today. I did mention yesterday that I was going to be talking more about Israel today, but I decided to make a very clear focus with the show today, something that I've actually been pointing at for a while. I've done a few different shows around. One was kind of around the larger technocratic coup conversation, Prospera being one part of this. And I mentioned yesterday one of the points was going to be around freedom cities and the direction of this. And something, as I was going through all this today, this clearly stands out to me as something that is not as discussed, not as highlighted, as seen as some of the other topics in the conversation, and yet is probably one of the most alarming within. I mean, it connects to everything we've talked about since I've been doing this, it seems. And on that note, I was going to put out Charlie Robinson's interview today. That'll be coming out tomorrow. I just wanted to make sure I focused on this today. Now, there's so much, every day, the 24-hour news cycle is increasingly insane. And I think it's obviously by design. There's too much to, for someone like me in particular, who tries to cover kind of the larger scope of what's going on. It's clearly by design, overwhelming. And what I'm recognizing more so today than ever is that there's these, like Maxwell, for example. I'll be giving you updates on that tomorrow. I'm sure you're all paying attention to the day-to-day notifications and what's going on around the story. But it's weird that to see the story become like this hyper-focused conversation when yet it's not that, like, there's less happening in this conversation now than there was, weeks ago. There's developments and things to point out, but it's weird to see the hyper-focus. I guess what I'm getting at is that clearly these discussions are there to kind of drown out the more important stories. And I think this is one of the most important things in this conversation because of how it interconnects with everything else, how it interconnects with Israel and the ongoing genocide, how it connects with Zionism itself and the infiltration of governments, how it connects with the technocratic shift in the world and this country. It's a very clear transition that we're watching. Now, my opinion, I'll make very clear today, but I don't think anybody can deny that we're watching, whether you want to frame it as the old guard and the new guard, a transition of power, a coup, the real power structure stepping back out of the shadows. I mean, there's a lot of ways you could look at what's happening, but we really can't deny how obvious this is. Techno-feudalism is a very important way to look at it because it's the, feudalism, thinking of like serfdom, kings and castles and so on, and that being, we know a time frame of like medieval times where a techno-fascist kind of idea, or rather techno-feudalism, would be exactly what it sounds like. A version of that, but in the technological world, where there's a great video, by the way. I'll shout out the person who made it. It was on somebody, Reddit posted it, some AI video they made. And I took the shot of it for the image today, but my God, is it perfect for what we're talking about. And you'll see that you might have caught it looping at the beginning from one of the platforms that does that, but we'll play it on the way out today. And it's just this really alarming view of like that kind of mindset, like like being a peasant and, a serfdom idea. And yet, and living with minimal, you'll own nothing and be happy. And then in the background, you see this kind of feudal technocratic, castle doesn't do it justice, and it's just, it's the separation of power, the wealth gap and so on. And these things continue to get worse and worse and worse. And the point is that this is now what feels like it's being driven in, rationalized. We're being sold, and many people are being sold on the idea that this is in fact what will save us from ourselves, that this is what's always been what's worked, or this is what has always worked. And what's even more interesting on top of all of it is when you dig into this, you come to find out that that's not even actually what they're telling you they're fighting for is not even actually what they're fighting for. They still have the same sort of endpoint, but what they're actually trying to accomplish with that endpoint is not even remotely close to what they're trying to convince people in the partisan field that they're trying to accomplish. That's why you have them out there pretending to be libertarians and, all the things they knew people wanted to hear. So today is going to be a focus on this idea: freedom cities, transition, technocracy, overlap with, smart cities, Washington, D.C., and what I see as a very clear shift into whatever you want to call it, but techno-fascism, techno-feudalism very much does fit the bill. Those are two different terms, by the way, but you can very clearly see how these things fit to what we're dealing with today. That's not the same as saying that that's what they're trying to accomplish. Maybe they've got the best of intentions and somehow don't realize what they're doing is illegal and unconstitutional. And, and you could fit that in now, or Biden and COVID-19, or, whatever you want to look at, if you realize it's just the government, and always has been government that has put us in this position. So hopefully we can evolve our ideas as this continues to grow and we evolve our understanding of the way the world works. But don't get caught in the 24-hour news cycle. That's something that really resonated with me today when I'm watching what's being discussed, or at the very least, be able to decouple from it. Because like today, for example, if I was just consumed by what the social media sphere is suggesting everyone's talking about, you'd have got the surface level points of Maxwell's update and what's going on in the transcripts and how Nick Sorter lied about the transcript on Twitter. At least that's one thing that I was going to point to. The point is that clearly there's a lot of surface level information that's not necessarily unimportant, but there's so much more going on just beneath the surface. Obviously, we see the reality of foreign policy, and that makes the case for me. How in the world that's not just nonstop 24/7? It should be. But today, this is the focus, the transition of power happening in the United States, and quite frankly, I think a global transition. But we'll focus today mostly on how it pertains to the United States, save for things like Prospera and another example of one in Africa we're not even going to get into today, but all of which tie back to Pronomos Capital, which is a group that seems to exclusively be funding, driving forward the, depending on where you're looking at it, freedom cities or special autonomous zones, or, there's numerous names that are being thrown out there. Now, all of these things are clearly connected, as I've been telling you, but in many ways, it's not supposed to be seen that way. So the reason I highlighted on that one group, that's Peter Thiel, that's Mark Andreessen, that's the whole Curtis Yarvin philosophy. And I'm going to paint a very clear picture for you today with things from mainstream articles, from my own research, from things they've said that many people don't know about. And I hope this really resonates with people today. So we're going to get right into it today. And I'm going to start with the point of martial law rolls out around the United States, our show yesterday. Now, really, this is, again, you can dispute the idea of the term, whether martial law as the definition fits to exactly what's happening. The reality is not necessarily to claim that it is verbatim what you might think the definition is, even though I do argue that is the case, but more so just the idea of what we're talking about. Being military, or what people had argued from the Republican side that Obama or Biden was going to roll out just military enforcement, right? Not civil, not police, but some kind of, higher level federal government military enforcement over states' rights, over your individual freedoms. That's obviously what we're seeing very clearly, whether or not you think it's okay, even though it's clearly legally not unconstitutional, provable and all. Maybe you think they've got good intentions. The point is that's obviously what we're watching play out. So keeping in mind the idea of this, what we're going to try to contextualize is, why I think this is part of what I just discussed. That what we're watching is, and not based on rumor and innuendo, which plays a part in the conversation, but based on the obvious interconnection between the people that funded the campaign, the people that are funding the direction of freedom cities and the transition into some kind of techno-feudal CEO-run fake libertarian dynamic, and what Donald Trump is currently doing around the country with Washington, D.C., and now the clear rollout to more cities, which is where we're going to start. But briefly, because we went over this yesterday and before that. So if you want to watch more on it, this show is important to watch. We went over it pretty in depth. Thank you for I just happened to see it, the shout out in Rumble. Thank you. Appreciate that for the donation, which I don't tend to look on the show. But so here's what we're going to start. First idea is just the framing of why Trump claims this is happening. The idea that we got to clean up the crime, right? Well, you could argue that despite the similar circumstances existing last time, that maybe he thought other things were more important, pretending for a moment that he really does, like taking at face value for the moment that he believes what he's saying. It doesn't make much sense when you look at the reality of the crime breakdown. Now, the argument that, well, they're lying about the stats. Yes, okay. You're not going to have a hard time selling me on that. Can I have the evidence of that? We can't, this idea that it's easy. Matt Miller does this, not Matt Miller, Stephen Miller does this routinely. The Democrats made up the numbers, but there's nothing to back that up, which again, I wouldn't even balk at. That's probably what's going on. But if there's nothing to back it up, then it's just a statement. And what we do have, however, are the statistics that claim otherwise. Yes, maybe they altered that, but unless you can prove that's the case, then what are we talking about? I mean, this is what's so frustrating about, if we know there's lies all the time on either side of a conversation, whatever the topic is. It brings to mind a good conversation I had with Shannon Joy on her show the other day, where we got into the kind of the nuance and the frustration around the Israel-Palestine point. And my point was simply, if we know that there's propaganda on both sides, then we just establish, okay, then there are lies everywhere, which kind of just evens the field out, right? And then we go, okay, we engage with each thing individually. Doesn't mean you should ignore one side because, well, there's propaganda, which is kind of what happens on one side of the conversation. So the idea is they could lie about anything. So too could the Republican side about whether theirs are safer. Don't want to think about that, right? The point is we know they all could. Now let's engage with what we have in front of us. And so the numbers, as we showed you before, 30-year low in Washington, D.C., yeah, maybe they're lying about that. But everything I can find outside of those numbers, outside of other, everything shows me that what he's pointing to is actually not the real picture. Not the same as saying that there's no crime. Clearly, D.C. can be rough. Same can Chicago and plenty of others. However, what I'll note now is that the list of cities he's now talking about, in case you didn't see yesterday's show, he's now discussing 19 more states of this happening, listing off about 4 or 5 specifically, which we'll go over in a minute, meaning this is expanding exactly like many of us promised it would, and just like many people that were supporting it said it wasn't going to. It's going to be over real quick, and now it's expanding. We have to take our time. The narrative shift, mission creep all the time. The point is that the cities he's listed off happen to be Democrats' strongholds, but more importantly, important cities when it comes to the transition of power, important cities when it comes to technocratic, all the stuff you might think about. All the main cities, the power hubs, matters when you're talking about a transition of power or a control, right? So when you look at this is from August 11th of this year, Newsweek, which I don't know if you can call it a conservative platform, but it's definitely not on the side of the left-leaning liberal platforms. And the point is, full list of America's most dangerous cities as Trump cracks down on D.C. So what you're going to find here is a list of these. Now, what I did is quickly, if I highlighted it entirely, which I'm just going to list them for you, but if you're looking at it now, that means that it's a right-leaning state. Like it'd be considered a Republican or conservative state. If I just highlighted the state on it, that simply means that it's somewhere in the middle. And that can go back and forth. The point is, there are plenty of them that are sort of, they call them competitive states where it's, or rather cities, which means that it can go either way. There's 50-50 if you look at it that way, but it oscillates. So when you look at this, if you look at the top 4, Little Rock, Arkansas is in the top 4. That's of the top 4 cities with the most crime, right? They listed the most dangerous cities in the United States. So we'll wait and see. Maybe that becomes the next one he talks about. But if it was going to be an order of what's most concerning crime-wise, why wouldn't have Memphis, Cleveland, Toledo, and Little Rock become the starting point? You also might note that Washington, D.C. doesn't even make the top 30. And that's according to pretty much any stat you want to look at. It's really strange, right? Now, you could argue that he has other metrics he's going by, but we have to be honest when we can recognize that this is not really lining up with the narrative. Now, top 4, one of them happens to be a Republican location. Less important for me because I think it's all the same thing when it comes to what the government does. But then you can see that you have Springfield, Illinois, number 6, which is kind of half and half. You have Evansville, Indiana, which is a Republican. You have Springfield, Minnesota. These are all above Washington, D.C., and these are Republican locations. But I'll happily point out that most of them are Democrat cities. But again, if you understand the way this works, or at least the way I believe it does, it's really inconsequential. In fact, this is the way it's done to play you against each other, to get you to go, yes, they're bad, so martial law, hooray. I mean, that's how this works. But really just recognizing all these different places. So just to make it as simple as possible, if they don't go after these cities before they go after all the other ones they're naming, then it's not about crime. It's not about safety. It's about something else, which is obviously the point we're making today. Nashville, Tennessee, there's on there too. That's just how I just showed you that. That's the one where, I'm in Tennessee. Interesting though. Like you can look at, even New York, for example, which we know is riddled with crime. It's just, we're being misled about what this really is. So keep this in mind. True Stream Media says, first, actually, I always do that. Tom and Lund says Democrats will call it martial law. All of the large crime-ridden cities have been run by Democrats for decades. Well, I literally just showed you. That's a narrative they love to put out. Yes, you will find most of them are Democrat-run cities, but not the way they frame it. It's not every single one all the time. And there are nuances around these things. Sometimes you have a Democrat city that's within a Republican state, which does change the conversation. The point, though, they love to make the case that all of them are crime and it's sort of like every Democrat or every immigrant rather votes Democrat. That's just not true. I make this point all the time. There's a slant, but it's not the way they frame it. But it says they created the mess and Trump will clean it up. Well, True Stream Media says, yeah, not a Democrat here. Same point for me. I'm not a Democrat, but I think you're wrong. It says, but I'm guessing the reason they'll call it martial law if Trump puts a standing army in the streets of Chicago is because that's literally the definition of martial law. But, again, you could dispute that, which people down there do. It's just a point, if Obama put a standing army in the middle of a city, let's pretend like they'd be like, yeah, the crime is bad. That's okay. That's not the case. So in that case, it comes down to you emotionally feeling better about one side. And that's your child. We have to start calling this what it is. That's childish. And it's about personal team sport politics. I don't think that's the majority today. This guy says, I really don't know what is so difficult about that they can't seem to understand. Tertiary Media says, I've seen so-called conservative people on here today openly supporting a communist military police state rather than admit they got played. I hate this year, she says, or they say. I mean, this is the point. We won't talk about the intel thing today, probably tomorrow. I put pretty much everything else off. But forcing and basically strong-arming Intel to essentially give the U.S. government 10% of the company, or at least there's more to the story. I'll get into it more tomorrow. But it says these are, imagine if that was the Democrat side, communism, socialism, but Trump does it, good business. It's blind. It's team sport politics. Nick Sorter says, and this is just to keep this in your mind, National Guard troops are to mobilize to 19 states, which I reported to yesterday, as to assist DHS in sweeping immigration and federal crime. So it's not even, it's in certain writings you can find, as I was looking at today, but it's not being very publicized that this is the same agenda because it's not supposed to feel that way. So when you see them pretending they're going after crime, but really rolling out ICE to go after people who are not actually illegal immigrants and breaking people's faces and busting car windows in because they're brown skin, then you recognize that it's clearly not what we're being sold as. And if we recognize the immigration crackdown was full of horrifying constitutional violations and illegal acts and largely went after people who were here legally and not with criminal records, then we should probably wonder whether DC is already the same thing. And I think you can already prove that. But he says, this is what 78 million Americans voted for. I'm so tired of this lazy argument. So you're telling us that it was on the ballot that you would roll out martial law and federalize DC states? I mean, come on. These people are children as well. The idea that or they're just dishonest. You're just forcing people underneath you who are also sycophants of the conversation if they just follow along to pretend that we all voted for this. That's insane. If this had been discussed on the stage, I mean, you know where this goes. It's just wild to me that they stand there and act like this. Troops will act as support pillar. He says that because, and it's in quotes, because he's supposed to. Because we're supposed to pretend like they're totally not enforcing the law, even though they literally are. As he just 30 seconds ago was screaming about deputizing everyone to have warrantless powers. Yay, freedom. Richard Willett says, lunacy. You lot are literally applauding a military police state. All this is just to set the tone for what's happening right now on the ground. And if you actually talk to people in Washington, D.C., for example, you get a mixed bag. This game they're playing where everyone's so happy, it's complete, literally there's police roaming the streets. That's why it feels so safe. I don't know any conservatives that would have ever said that if it wasn't for this immediate political moment. On top of that, there's just as many people that are roaming the streets telling you this is horrifying. But True Stream Media, we played this the other day. This is the same thing. Nick Sorter saying, hooray, martial law. Can you restore a constitutional system by having someone else abuse the Constitution? Important way to start. We'll show you one last point on this, and we're going to get right into the idea of what's continuing beyond Washington, D.C. And the point is to overlap this with what's going on in places like Prospero or even El Salvador, by the way, or the plan that's already happening of multiple cities within the United States that Peter Thiel, Mark Andreessen, Sam Altman, and all the rest are funding. But we're supposed to pretend like that's totally not the same thing that's literally happening right now.
Like 1984 could actually happen. This is the direction the world is going in at the present time.
This is exactly what King George III did in 1768 in Boston by deploying redcoats to police the city for their safety. And I've got people that are responding to the things I'm saying that I'm just attacking Trump.
There will be no loyalty except loyalty to the party.
I have Trump derangement syndrome. No, I have tyranny derangement syndrome. I've been calling this stuff out for 13 years. I have watched us tiptoe into tyranny this entire time.
And a good point to make is, unlike people like Alex Jones, who, remember, they used to work with him until they left and have told others that they are manipulators, don't check their facts, like everybody else, like David Knight and Greg Reese, everyone else who left. The point is, they have been calling this, True Street Media has been calling this out for 13 years, and they're also calling it out today. And they have never faltered on calling out what Trump is doing, or the North American Union, or the globalist Zionist overlap. See, that's the difference. Consistency, principle, not pulling the punches when it matters most.
And now we're here.
But always there will be the intoxication of power.
Were we warned this would happen? Under what pretense were we warned this was going to happen? Oh, Rex 84, martial law, specifically on the pretext of illegal immigration.
We're about to walk off straight into 1984, and you have people right now who are deep-throating the boot. I'm surprised they can even speak. The boot is so far down their throats.
If you want a picture of the future, imagine a boot stamping on a human face forever.
Look yourself in the mirror and just think about it. Is this constitutional? Is our country anywhere near constitutional? Can you restore a constitutional system by having someone abuse the Constitution? Can you go back to a place of having rights, peace, and prosperity by withholding peace, by depriving people of all that they have, and of using martial law powers? Can you get back to a constitutional balanced system that respects people's rights through martial law?
Do you see what is happening?
The moral to be drawn from this dangerous nightmare situation is a simple one. Don't let it happen. It depends on you.
And by the way, I'm not even really sure how Trump's going to clean up D.C., considering all of the worst offenders in D.C. are still on recess.
Right. Meaning the Congress, right? But it's such a breath of fresh air to look, to watch True Street Media, Aaron and Melissa, and listen to them, continually stand by their principles, whether it's Trump or Biden or anybody else, and continue to call out the same thing. It's insane to me how clear it is to look at somebody like that, whether or not we agree on everything, and look at the mainstream alternative media and ask yourself why. I mean, I'm just not of the mind that everyone's just so stupid they can't tell. I really don't believe that. I have a much higher opinion of most people in this country, at the very least. And in general, I truly do. And so there's propaganda, social engineering. That's what this comes down to. It's people like Benny Johnson. Breaking Trump will be mobilizing the guard. Hooray, martial law. This person says the ignorance on display in this comment section is mind-blowing. The same people who were against government takeover are now cheering it on. Very simple. Not very hard to see. So it's beginning to go further. As we said yesterday, Trump says he'll send troops to clean up San Francisco. Well, was San Francisco on that list of the top 30? It's very clear that this is about something else. Even if you want to pretend that it's genuinely about stopping crime, and if you're only aiming at Democrat cities, which there's plenty of others that are even other Democrat cities that are higher crime, why would that make sense to you? It says, look at what Democrats have done to San Francisco, Trump says. They've destroyed it. We could clean that up too. We'll clean that one up too. Mission creep. Remember, this started as it's going to be real quick. Anywhere you look, everywhere he could speak when it was happening, it's going to be so fast, you won't even see it was quick. And then the very next time he came out, it was, well, we have to extend it out. It's going to take a minute. Yeah, like everybody with a brain already saw it coming, because that's always how it goes. San Francisco, Memphis. At least it's interesting because they were worried about it early on, but he says, I'll think about Memphis, which is just weird. But the point is that there's a lot of these different points of interest. Memphis is at least on the higher on the list. As Trump administration unleashes federal show of force in D.C., other U.S. cities on president's radar push back. Now it says Bondiaf has made it clear the federal takeover of D.C. goes hand in hand with the administration's hardline immigration enforcement. It's that alone that's missed on most people, it seems. And at least I don't think they're really publicizing that, but they're at least in some cases making that clear. This is the same thing, which is probably not that hard for people to, they go after them too, but it's not supposed to make sense, right? If this is about something, other than the idea that you think they're going after all the worst criminals, but we can prove that's not the case. There's the conflict. But it says using control over law enforcement in the district as a way to try to put an end to the city's laws that protect undocumented migrants. At least that's how this left-leaning platform frames it. The federal government could slash funding to cities that don't comply and send in law enforcement as it has done in Los Angeles and DC. Remember, Los Angeles, same ultimate outcome, but did it for a different reason, right? So it's as much as they're intertwined, you have to recognize it's just like with COVID-19 or anything else. The solution is what they want. They're looking for a problem to rationalize the solution. That's how this works. That's why Melissa and that's ridiculous. Oh my God, that's ridiculous. Just said his name like 30 seconds ago. True Stream Media, they just said basically that, now I forgot the two. Anyway, the point was that ultimately that indeed we saw the same thing in Los Angeles, right? The rationale, the justification, and clearly they will use it wherever they can. And so this says the federal government could slash funding to cities that don't comply, right? So you're already seeing these coercive measures. Like this was a big thing when it first happened. Or, you have to do this or say that or delete these things or we're going to hold back funding. And everyone said that's what they do. No, there's very clear constitutional issues here, especially when it comes to states' rights at the core. But ultimately, it's about do what we want or we're going to take action. On August 11th, Trump announced that, and of course, the real point is that they're not really even going after the problem they claim they are. I know that's the thing you want to believe out there, but the facts simply point to show otherwise. On August 11th, Trump announced the decision to declare a crime emergency. And this is what we knew, a crime emergency. Well, the reality is that there is a clear boundary, a definition for what constitutes a state of emergency. Not just in general, but what they're allowed. You can't just be like, it's a, I'm trying to think of something ridiculous. An air emergency. There's there's bad air days. There's plenty of things, but to claim that we're going to shut everything down because of X, Y, and Z. When Democrats did that under the guise of fighting climate change, they were rightly up in arms. So the point is, crime is not an emergency. Now you can claim that there's a level, like if you were saying, well, look, the crime is so bad that literally nothing can function and people are dying, but that's not what's actually happening. The numbers are lower than they're telling you. So you're just declaring an emergency to be able to rationalize an unconstitutional action. It's the same thing when they tried to claim Tren de Aragua was invading in Venezuela, except simultaneously it was Biden that did it before. That's why Biden's a criminal. But it's, you pick your narrative. It's about trying to justify it. The crime emergency, when it comes down to the legal reality, is unjust. At the core value of declaring an emergency based on some kind of, you have to be able to verify these things. And it says, and federalize DC police force, which is, obviously going in the wrong direction when it comes to everything we're talking about. Constitutional value. At the end of the day, him stepping in to do this, especially when faking an emergency, is wildly outside the bounds. Saying his administration was going to restore the city back to the gleaming capital that everybody wants it to be. Now, do you think that's going to happen? I sure love to see it be a better city. But if all we're seeing is enforcement and, just strong arm jackboot enforcement, are they going to stay there forever? If not, then they're eventually going to go away. And then guess what? It's going to go right back to what it was before. I hope not. But realize if they're not trying to make it better and they're just trying to accomplish a certain control transition, and that's what's going to ultimately happen. But we'll find out. And we'll see. Or you're cheering on the rationale for why they should stay there is just as alarming. It says Washington's mayor and police chief were caught off guard, learning about the takeover for the first time as they watched Trump announce it live, which is pretty interesting. Of course, it's always the guys that we're fighting the evil Democrat deep state as opposed to telling them, if this was some kind of a coordinated action about trying to reduce crime, at the very least, it's obvious that they would at least have to pretend like they wanted to do the same thing. So it's clearly there's more going on around this story. Violent crime in the nation's capital is at its lowest levels in decades, according to city officials. Take that for what you will. In other states, however, governors control guard troops. During emergencies, the president can federalize guard troops. Yes, that's why they did that. But again, the legal reality of whether that constitutes an emergency within that power is obviously not the case, or it doesn't meet the level necessary. And it says, as Trump did in Los Angeles in June. Same point. And how long have we been talking about this? Government, what is the term I use? Rule by executive order, emergency governance. It's been happening for a long time. And every president points to the other one about how bad it is. Same with executive orders, and they do the same thing because it's all about maintaining that status quo, declaring emergencies for anything, opioids, anything. How this works. We all seem to know that and see that during the COVID dynamic, but now people are looking elsewhere. A move that state of California is challenged in federal court. See how that goes? You look at Chicago, how bad it is. You look at Los Angeles, how bad it is. He says, we have other cities that are very bad. New York has a problem. And then you have, of course, Baltimore, Oakland. Funny choices, don't you think? Yes, they're clearly cities that we can point at that have high levels of crime, but not in the top, these are not the top 10. It's an odd choice unless you start to stand back and look at the value of these cities. Not necessarily financial value, but the value for what they're trying to accomplish. Quote, we're going to make it safe and we're going to then go on to other places, but we're going to stay here for a while, he says to dozens of enforcement agents. Funny how he told you it was going to be real quick and it's going to be over quickly, but now we're going to be here for a while when he talks to the power, the enforcement arm. They're wearing red hats. African-American ladies, beautiful ladies are saying, please, please, Trump, come to Chicago. Can't we read this by now? You know, the same way he was going, all the people in the world were saying, please, Trump, please make a deal. And then he got caught lying about that. How all of them said, that's not true. We didn't. And then clearly they didn't even have those deals. One of many examples that Trump blusters, lies. Him coming out and saying a bunch of random black ladies with red hats were going, please take over Chicago. First of all, I find that really hard to believe. But he lies about a lot of stuff like any of them do. Left, right, they're liars. And seeming to conflate his deployment of troops in D.C. with his takeover of the city's police force, Trump on Friday said he can keep the National Guard in the nation's capital, quote, as long as I want, if he declares a national emergency. Yeah, here we are. All right. So apparently in the mindset of the current president, if he declares an emergency, he can do whatever he wants, which he's basically already said more than once. Johnson and other U.S. major mayors have called on the Trump administration to restore more than $800 million in violence and crime prevention grants that the DOJ has withheld to force states into cooperating. Now, this is really interesting. Now, of course, the early point you could make is that they're not using that money to fight crime. But yes, we should prove these things, right? This is the whole thing. The broad assumption that we know this about them, all Democrats anywhere in the world, it's just lazy. I wouldn't disagree that people in both left and right would lie to you about damn near anything, but we should prove it all. The point, though, is that by holding back $800 million that's supposed to go to fight crime and then claiming that you're not fighting crime, it just seems like a counterintuitive thing to do. But it's saying that ultimately they withheld the force to force the states into cooperating with the immigration enforcement efforts, which was going on before this situation, right? So they're saying, we want to get these immigrants and you're not cooperating. So we're going to hold back your money that helps you fight crime. Then they stand up later and say, you have too much crime. We have to go in and take over the city. Kind of feels like a little bit of coordination there. But it says these anti-violence programs have a direct impact on our work to reduce crime and violence in Chicago. Sending the National Guard could destabilize our public safety. This is the administration of Chicago. And our public safety efforts and would be counterproductive to rebuilding trust between residents and law enforcement. And it says Chicago police said Friday homicides are down 31% this year, shootings 36%. Yeah, maybe they're lying, but the data that I could find seems to suggest that is what's happening pretty much broadly right now, but that's not going to matter. So here is, and I want to include this as well, just to reiterate this. Remember, this is something that he's already telling you is going to be kind of an ongoing reality. Whether or not it's they roll out martial law across the country, the Pentagon is planning to create what they're calling a military reaction force. Just a perpetual, ongoing, forever kind of resting military deployment force in certain central places in the country that can rapidly deploy anywhere. It's saying for civil unrest. It says the Trump administration is evaluating plans that would establish a domestic civil disturbance quick reaction force. I mean, this alone shows you that this is not going away. And it says composed of hundreds of National Guard troops tasked with rapidly deploying into American cities facing protests or other unrest. So now we're just framing protest as unrest. That's what all the corporate media seems to be doing now, including, ones like this that used to be like, oh, we have to stand with protesters. It's weird. And it says, and this is Pentagon documents showing this, the plan calls for 600 troops to be on standby at all times, so they could deploy in as little as an hour. They would be split into 2 groups of 300 and be stationed at military bases in Alabama and Arizona, with purview of regions east and west of Mississippi River, respectively. Cost projections outlined in the documents indicate that such a mission, if the proposal is adopted, could stretch into the hundreds of millions of dollars should military aircraft and air crews be required to ready around the clock. Now, they say if they use commercial, it would be less, but we're still spending money. Is that what we need? Do Americans want a standing army in this country ready to deploy? I mean, we already have a standing army, I understand, which is completely counter to the original founding ideas. But regardless, this is about something else. Beyond just the military and the bases, this is having a deployable force that's literally on guard, ready to be deployed, like, as it waiting to shut down protests is what Trump seems to be pointing to. The proposal, which has not been previously reported, represents another potential expansion of President Trump's willingness to employ the armed forces on American soil, which is a problem, guys. You understand, the way he's currently doing it is a violation of Posse Comitatus. They seem to pretend that when they declare an emergency that just nothing else matters. It's not true. The reality is that deploying National Guard across state lines from other states, that's a violation. For deploying any of them, Marines or National Guard included, and if they're enforcing the law, that's a crime. It's happening everywhere. We've had the Marines speak up about this. We have images of them literally arresting people. It's very clear what's happening. That's going to be important as this goes forward. Now, Jack House simply points out something you already seen. We covered this in the show. Under his seemingly innocuous executive order, Trump has just made protests in Washington, D.C. illegal if he doesn't like them. So unless you have a permit, protests in D.C. are illegal, and they will arrest protesters. Now, even if you have a permit, by the way, all they have to do is claim somebody's being violent, and this is left and right for a long time now. They shut it all down. Shut it down and watch them deny the permits. We've talked about this already. It's all right in his executive order, by the way, that came out March 28th. Funny how he almost knew this was going to happen, didn't he? In March, talking about Washington, D.C. protests. Funny, it's almost like they planned it, Conspiracy theory. And of course, True Street Media points out, like she said in that video, on this day 250 years ago, this was on the 23rd. Oh, I guess that is today. Oh, I thought that was earlier. That's funny. King George III put out a proclamation for suppressing rebellion and sedition in the North American colonies. Funny how we're right back there. And then this is what Trump said in the past. I think this was LA about protests. This is it's so very transparent. It doesn't matter whether you dislike the side. We all have a legal right, or rather constitutional right, to protest, to petition our government for grievance. This is what we all at least tell ourselves. But here's Trump coming out, as you already saw, blatantly telling you, if you protest, we are going to shut it down. Not if you're violent, not if you break the law while you're doing it, but just if you protest.
Big on Saturday. We're going to have a lot of, and if there's any protest that wants to come out, they will be met with very big force. By the way, for those people that want to protest, they're going to be met with very big force. And I haven't even heard about a protest, but,
It goes on for another 20 seconds. Just the context is clear. There's no other discussion there. The point, be met with force, right? Now, of course, the ones that want to always give him the benefit of the doubt, even though it almost always turns out to be exactly what the worst case scenario is that ultimately, he just meant the violent ones. He meant you can fill in the gap, can't you? Sort of like the bigger conversation about the Epstein overlap, right? Jones was just constantly trying to force in, which is that, he meant that the Democrats inserted fake information. Not that the whole thing is fake, even though he's continued right to this day to keep saying the whole thing is fake. The whole thing is a hoax. And yet they still do their dutiful best to go in and go, no, here's what Trump really meant, because you're somehow psychic or you can read his mind. These people are grifters out there trying to sell you on what they want you to think is happening. This is exactly what it sounds like, because we can see them doing that. Unconstitutional actions. People that pretend to care about the Constitution should care about this. Or I guess that doesn't make sense. If they do care about it, then they should, but they don't. But this is another example. This was Laura Loomer saying, President Trump says, stop the protest now, back when they were protesting the genocide that she clearly supports and Trump clearly is involved in. She says, see, I told you he doesn't stand for the free Palestine freaks. Free Palestine is not MAGA. MAGA doesn't support terrorism. Donald Trump is a Zionist. Yeah. And they don't want you to see that now, but that's the case. It is. And we know that. And he said, stop the protests now. Protests. Why? Because Israel didn't like it. And what they do, they flooded it with Zionists that were throwing things at, hitting it with boards. It's all on the video today. You can clearly see them. And the police stood there and watched it. And I'm not talking about just one video that I care to look at to pretend it's the whole thing. I'm talking the entire situation. The ongoing look of hours of video that can clearly show you, or testimony from people that were there, Jewish people included, who literally were there with them, or that the fact that all of these protests were largely put on by Jewish organizations. But people like vile Laura Loomer don't care about that. But Adam Green says Trump said shut it down to the college protests. It's all easy to see, guys. And now Greg Reese is pointing out what we should be doing if we care about what we claim we believe in this country. He says, this is the proper response. If you celebrate martial law, you're not American. Well, I get what he's saying, but I don't like, right now we're getting a lot from the Republican side that says like, if you don't do this, you're not American, right? Just because you're born here doesn't make you American. That's wrong, by the way. Yes, it does. But the point is, you're an American regardless. If you believe in martial law, you're still an American, guys. It just means you just don't understand, or at least you don't care about the foundational ideas of this country. But you're still an American, right? But his point is simply that you don't believe in these values, which I agree with. Or you're pretending to, or you don't understand them, right? But here this person says a large crowd chases law enforcement out of Columbia Heights in Washington, D.C. Dozens boo and chant ICE go home until they return to their vehicles and leave the area. Now ask yourself, why is it largely ICE as well? Well, first, because there is immigration they're still doing, but realize that it's become the national Gestapo, guys. That's the point. That's what you're going to see roll out in situations, whether or not it's immigration related. It's enforcement, even though that doesn't really make sense when even legal at the end of the day. But the point is, these people chase them away. And by the way, successfully, we're able to get them to leave. We saw this just the other day. Let me just turn this down. I'm just going to mute it for the moment. But we saw this on the barbershop the other day, right? Where they were literally trying to force their way into a barbershop without a warrant. There's no way around that. That's a crime. And people were going, where's your warrant? Identify yourselves. And they left because people were filming them. And they were clearly, they know what they're doing is wrong. They just know they've got the backing of the administration. But you can see this. People are literally non-violently to their chagrin. Like they want you to be violent so they can rationalize whatever they want to do, but they drove them away. Crowds cheer and celebrate once law enforcement leaves. That's what you got to do, guys. Stand up for your rights. And yeah, as Larkin Rose would say, you may get hit, beat, right? You have to, but the point is, if you stand there peacefully as a crowd, eventually their arms will get tired. It's may not sound doesn't make you happy, but it's an important thing to think about. Stand your ground, because not only are you right, and I mean in a nonviolent way, the point is that eventually they will give up. When it really comes to, I'm talking like if the whole country, they can't put everybody in a jail cell. They'll sure as hell try. I don't want to test that reality either. But the point is that we need to stand up for these things if we really care about them. Now, this very importantly overlaps with many different points of the conversation, right? The Washington, D.C. multi-state rollout martial law. So you could just argue that they're just, maybe even Trump doesn't know. It's just really about enforcement and people in charge or people in place. I do believe my opinion is that he's very much aware of this. And I'm going to paint a picture for why I think that is. How obviously you have Peter Thiel and Vance, who's literally an extension of that, and almost every part in his cabinet. Oh, by the way, which Palantir and Thiel and the rest of them are very much overlapped with Israel, which we're not even going to get much into today. I wasn't even planning on bringing it up today to make this point very clear, but it comes out in one of these articles that I wasn't expecting. Literally calling what we're discussing today tech Zionism. I almost put it in the title, but I don't want to make it about that today. But it's impossible to decouple these things. But the point is that Donald Trump is either overtaken by this, all of this, or very much a part of it. And this is a great article from Derek Brose. Meet the Peter Thiel acolytes in Donald Trump's second administration. Just important to read if you want to understand just the Peter Thiel overlap. But he goes on to point out Curtis Yarvin, which I'll include as well. This is part 2. Meet the man whose philosophy has influenced Peter Thiel and the technocrats. Great article. I'm only going to read a quick part of this, and we're going to go into his overlap. Now, the reason this is important, guys, is to kind of set the mindset for what this is and why you'll see why this connects. Clearly, I'm sure you already get the picture of what we've already talked about if you watch this show. Prospera and the funding and the kind of ideological change that's happening. The point is that people like Curtis Yarvin and Vance and Teal and Andreessen and Karp and all the rest have this very alarming mindset, which I'm going to paint very clearly for you as we go through the rest of this. And it is driving this mindset, this idea that somehow we need oligarchs to rule our lives, otherwise we're never going to be happy. Doesn't that sound very familiar? It should. It's coming from the same place. As it becomes clear, the acolytes of technocrat and faux libertarian Peter Thiel will wield power in the second Trump administration, it is increasingly important to understand some of the influences behind Thiel and his fellow technocrats. One of the largest influences on Thiel's thinking is a man named Curtis Yarvin, sometimes known by his pen name, at least before he was writing almost entirely behind that name, and it wasn't making it clear that he was who he was. But I don't know if he still uses it, but the point is his name at that time was Mencius Moldbug. Yarvin and fellow philosopher Nick Land founded the school of thought known as the Dark Enlightenment, or the neo-reactionary movement. Very weird to see something like Dark MAGA and Elon Musk with this whole thing. Like, there's, sure could just be coincidence, I guess, but I'll let you think about that. While Yarvin's writing and influence has mostly been on the edges of the mainstream, in the last decade, his appeal has grown to the point that he is now being interviewed by the New York Times and cited as the philosopher influencing the MAGA movement. Now, this article is written in February 2025. Now, this is really just that alone I want to show you, and it's really about Derek's kind of framing, but also this one personal note. He says, I first became aware of Yarvin and his ideas in 2016 when I noticed what was then known as the alt-right infiltrating American libertarian circles. In my 2017 essay, Derek speaking, Removing the Alt-Right Infection on the American Libertarian Movement, I detailed what I saw as a pipeline from the libertarian movement to the alt-right as self-professed libertarians. Voluntarists and anarchists joined the burgeoning Trump movement. And we saw this after the last administration, where we've talked about it many times, like diehard libertarians, the anarchists even, suddenly became statists because they thought Trump was the guy. It was very weird. Or they never really believe what they claim. We still see it happening today. There's plenty of libertarians out there that somehow rationalize supporting a statist military police state happening. But overall, the idea that we see this, the simplest way to put it, and it happens everywhere, is people like Teal and all of them pretending to be libertarians to get inside a certain movement to do what they're doing now. At least that's how I see it. Curtis Yarvin confirms his close relationship with Mark Andreessen, Peter Thiel, and his influence over J.D. Vance. Now, an article from Time Magazine, or I guess just Time, we call it Time Magazine still, March 24th, 2025. What we must understand about the Dark Enlightenment movement. Just a few things I want to point out for this. Most of these articles overlap, and there's points they all kind of make, but there's certain points I want to pluck out of some of these to paint a really clear picture here. Now it says, the rise of the Dark Enlightenment movement and its most vocal steward, software engineer and blogger Curtis Yarvin. A software engineer by training, Yarvin has become a kind of official philosopher for the tech leaders like PayPal co-founder Peter Thiel and Mosaic founder Mark Andreessen. You're going to find the same circle in everything we're discussing today, even though they're not supposed to really be the same conversation. Not unlike the futurists, Yarvin advocates for replacing democracy, if you want to pretend that's what we have, with a kind of techno-feudal state. Now, that's literally what they're like. This is their terminology, their discussion points. I don't think he necessarily says techno-feudal state, but we'll go through it. It's literally what they're outlining. And it says, for the government to be run like corporations. Isn't that what we keep hearing about this, Trump's administration and what they want to do with freedom cities? And it says, with the president as its CEO. The new system the new system is elitist. Quote, humans fit into dominant submission structures, Yarvin wrote in 2008, and it's authoritarian. So realize this guy who is very much the philosophy behind, is the driving philosophical force behind most of Trump's administration and people driving it. And he's talking about humans fit into dominant submission structures. And it gets worse, far worse. As for Yarvin's controversial opinions and whether or not Thiel holds them, Yarvin has said said that his patron is fully enlightened. Talking about Thiel. He has been coaching Thiel. What's more, in a recent interview with the Hoover Institution, Andreessen quoted Yarvin and called him a friend. Clearly, just there's very clear overlap here. If not, there's an agenda around it all. Using a variety of mixed metaphors, Yarvin advocates for a butterfly revolution, a quote, full power start to the U.S. government accomplished by giving absolute sovereignty, is the word they use, to a single organization. This is imagined as an internal coup meant to privatize the government and replace democracy with complete executive authority. Okay, well, damn it, if that doesn't feel like exactly what we're watching right now, right? So maybe you could argue they just believe the idea, but I think you sense that I believe there's something else going on. So they're literally outlining what they're discussing, and trust me, we're going to go through it more, outlining what their mindset is. But I wanted you to hear this first. It is imagined as an internal coup meant to privatize the government and replace democracy or whatever we have with a executive authority. I mean, guys, to a T, what is happening right now. I think we're watching a transition of power. Zionist, technocrat, globalist. I think it's very clear. And that we're watching them privatize public-private partnerships. I mean, it's very, very clear. And that they're ultimately trying to transition out of this as they're trying to tell you. I mean, it's literally on the surface of the conversation. It's a very public, it seems, transition of power. Now it says, when courts prevent unconstitutional orders, Yarvin says they should just be ignored. Yeah, exactly. Now that point's been made by a lot of people because it's very clearly what they're currently doing. And it's what they all seem to do, but I mean, it's like really, it seems to have been embodied by the current Trump administration. It says that so much of this seems to mirror the actions of the Trump administration, and Doge may not be a coincidence. I agree. Yarvin's musings in 2009 that the definition of a sovereign is that a sovereign is above the law. Interesting. Well, I don't disagree with that in certain contexts, but it's the way that they're viewing this, right? That so somehow that not everybody's a sovereign, right? That's the way this is being viewed. Hold a mirror to Trump's February tweet that he who saves his country violates no law. In fact, I'll grab that so we can include that for the show. But interesting, right? I mean, this is the whole thing. That's why people, it's the article. I thought it was going to be a tweet. I'll include it either way. The point is, we saw him. It was very Machiavellian. I think it was referencing Napoleon quote. The point is that is what this ideology is. As I nodded to then, but we're going to make it very clear today. Yeah, let me sure I didn't miss that. Okay, so this is just one quick point from the New Yorker. Curtis Yarvin's plot against America, June 2nd, 2025. Very quickly, just 2 points on this. Yarvin proposes that nations should eventually be broken up into what he calls a patchwork of statelets, like Singapore, Dubai, each with its own sovereign ruler. Right? Not you, but them. They're the ones above the law. You have to abide by whatever the technocrat rulers say. The eternal political problems of legitimacy, accountability, and succession would be solved by a secret board with the power to select and recall the otherwise all-powerful CEO of each sovereign corporation, or SovCorp. Right. So what I see this as is they get to be the board, right? They're the elitist at the top of the you own nothing and be happy dynamic, right? They own everything, not you. But they'll do it so you can be happy. It was what they want you to. Like, the idea is that they'll be the ones above everything. They're the sovereigns. And ultimately they can go, well, now the CEO is not doing what we like, and we'll remove him, put somebody else in. In what world do you think that's somehow going to embody what you want? Prospera and others are showing you that right now. Yarvin's congenial cynicism about governance disappears as soon as he starts talking about dictatorial regimes. Yarvin is very fond of El Salvador. He has kind words for El Salvador's strongman, Bukele. Now realize Bukele, again, is a very proud Zionist. He's made that clear. It overlaps with all the things we're talking about. Now, what I'm going to show you is what they're doing in El Salvador is an overlap to this. And there is association with all of them and what they're doing, including the Trump administration, as we all know. These are different, in my mind, trial balloons for what this idea is. And El Salvador is the same thing we're going to see in Prospera. The illegal actions, the removal of judges to initiate what they want, the suspension of civil liberties, everywhere you look right now. And it says, even Trump's most pessimistic critics have been startled by the speed at which the president in his second term has moved to impose autocracy on America, concentrating power in the executive branch and often enough in the hands of the richest men on earth. Who can deny that? Well, just because you want to say that that's what's best for us, or it doesn't change that that's what's happening and that is what we shouldn't be wanting in this country or anywhere. That's not what's in the interest of freedom. And also that it aligns with exactly what this ideology is. Now, 2024, June 22nd, where J.D. Vance gets his weird, terrifying, techno-authoritarian ideas. In 2008, a software developer in San Francisco named Curtis Yarvin, writing under the pseudonym, as we pointed out earlier, proposed a horrific solution for people he deemed not productive. Actually, I'll grab this really quickly since this is obviously relevant. Oh, what was that? Oh, now I'm going to forget it. It was the point. It was the article, the show we did about Taylorism, or Derek's article. Actually, I can't remember now. Shoot, I'll try to grab it when we go back. It was a precursor to the whole, everything we're talking about, to even the eugenics and what is the word I'm looking for? To technocracy and all of this. But it's about the idea of, it was the guy that timed things with a watch and was trying to shave seconds off the production, which, you could argue that is not necessarily bad, but it took a really hard turn into what we're watching today, right? Invasive control of your life for the betterment of all of us, or not really at the end of the day. But that was the point that came to my mind, right? That people are not deemed productive. Right, why they get to dictate whether you are or not what you're supposed to be is the problem. Convert them into biodiesel, he said, which can help power the minibuses. Now, Yarvin, a self-described reactionary and extremist who was 35 years old at the time, clarified later that he was just joking. But then he continued, the trouble with the biodiesel solution is that no one would want to live in a city whose public transportation was fueled, even just partly, by the distilled remains of its late underclass. Yeah, very funny joke. However, it helps us describe the problem we are trying to solve. Oh, does it? Our goal, in short, is a humane alternative to genocide. That is what he wrote. That alone should terrify us, because this is guiding mindset policy of people in power. The idea that you're even the joke, that is a joke for authoritarian sociopaths. Yeah, they wouldn't like it if we fueled the trucks with their dead bodies. It's not funny to anybody other than those who kind of go, yeah, maybe we should. That's insane. And on top of that, it overlaps the whole technocratic, the whole what is it called? Blanking on a lot of words today. We talked about that in the overlap of turning human bodies into material that can be used. And it's a real conversation. But the overall point is, in short, his goal is, quote, what he said, is a humane alternative to genocide. Then he concluded that the, quote, best humane alternative to genocide is to virtualize these people, meaning people like us. Imprison them in permanent solitary confinement, is what he wrote, where, quote, to avoid making them insane, though, they would be connected to an immersive virtual reality interface, so they could experience a rich, fulfilling life in a completely imaginary world, of course, like that movie with the cartoon Wall-E, I think, where they're all on the big ship and they're all on their thing. That's not a joke, by the way. Let you live in your metaverse. Whitney and I talked about that a long time ago. These things are all falling into place, guys. It says Yarvin's disturbing manifestos have earned him influential followers. Think about the kind of people that read those things and go, "Oh, I like that guy. I want to follow his ideas." Chief among them, people that are loving the ideas and following him, people like Peter Thiel and his one-time Silicon Valley protege, J.D. Vance, whom the Republican Party just nominated, this is, of course, remember, 2024, to Donald Trump's vice president. If Trump wins the election, there is little doubt that Vance will bring Yarvin's twisted techno-authoritarianism to the White House. And one can imagine with horror what a receptive would-be autocrat like Trump might do with those ideas. Of course, from anybody who is paying attention's perspective, it's the same difference as Biden or Obama or all the rest. They're all not even would-be autocrats. They are exactly that. And now it says, way back in 2012, in a speech on how to reboot the U.S. government, he said, and this is Yarvin, if Americans want to change their government, they're going to have to get over their dictator phobia. Yeah, they said that. He had also written favorably of slavery and white nationalists in late aughts, though he has stated that he is not a white nationalist himself. But the thing that stands out to me more than ideas about racism or whatever else, or pro-slavery, I could point out how ridiculous that is, or how absurd it is to promote anything that's putting, the idea of slavery in itself, like how anybody that could argue for that, that's just insane. But the point that stands out more than anything is we need to get over our phobia of dictators. because they're transitioning you into the idea that we need, like, but a good dictator, which is, by the way, exactly what people are saying, right? Or even that it was what I think Trump, or even like an Alex Jones point, right? Said that my family's tied to deep state, but we're the good deep state fighting the bad deep state. That's just crazy. That was something they said out loud. And it says Max Chufkin describes Yarvin as the house political philosopher of the Thielverse, a term for people in Thiel's orbit. In 2016, Yarvin attended Thiel's election night party in San Francisco, where, according to Chufkin, champagne flowed once it became clear that Thiel's investment in Donald Trump would pay off. Vance owes his meteoric rise to Peter Thiel, who largely bankrolled it, which you all know. But for those that don't, it's worth pointing out. As a Yale Law student in 2011, he heard Thiel give a speech in which, or as the story goes, in which he suggested that smart people should be working in tech instead of wasting their time in elite schools. Afterward, Vance emailed Thiel, who invited him to California. Following a brief stint as a lawyer, Vance moved to San Francisco. Eventually, he landed at Mithril Capital, a company co-founded by Thiel. When Vance moved back to Ohio and eventually started his own fund, Naria Capital, both Thiel and Mark Andreessen invested in it. When Vance ran for U.S. Senate in 2022, Thiel spent an unprecedented $15 million on the campaign and persuaded Trump to endorse him. Vance had previously compared Trump to Hitler. Like all the rest of them, by the way. Marco Rubio, pretty much everyone. Musk, terrible things about Trump until suddenly they're all friends. You know, it's always what's going on behind the scenes. The point is, whether they like each other or not, it's not about that, is the point. In 2024, Thiel led the charge to convince Trump to pick Vance as his VP. Vance is a Thiel creation, and like his billionaire benefactor, who once wrote, quote, "I no longer believe that freedom and democracy are compatible." Vance embraces a radical ideology hell-bent on destroying government as we know it, and they got these ideas, at least in part, from Yarvin. Now, look, maybe you believe that. I'm not an advocate for democracy, mob rule. I have a very different opinion of this, but at least that's more in the direction of some semblance of freedom than a dictatorial regime. But overall, maybe you agree with that statement. But the point that needs to be made here is that that's not what they're claiming. Trump and Vance, freedom and democracy, and but clearly their ideology is not driving in that direction. So even if you agree with this, then you need to acknowledge they're just lying to everybody, probably because they know most people don't want that. It says Yarvin is the chief thinker behind an obscure but increasingly influential far-right neo-reaction movement, some call the Dark Enlightenment. Among other things, it openly promotes dictatorships as superior to democracies because it's like a CEO. That's the point. And views nations like the United States as outdated software systems. Yarvin seeks to re-engineer governments by breaking them up into smaller entities called patchworks, which would be controlled by tech corporations. Each patchwork would be ruled by a realm, a corporation with absolute power. Because we know how well corporations, clearly they're super, God, every word's slipping my mind today. Benevolent is what I was looking for. Clearly, they've shown us throughout history, right? The corporations will always do what's right. I mean, that's such an insane thing. You give them more power, it's only going to get worse. But it says citizens would be free to move, but every other realm would also be ruled by corporate governments with chilling impunity. In Frisk Corp, as Yarvin calls the San Francisco realm, an all-seeing Orwellian... Oh, let's point out, by the way, San Francisco is now on the chopping block for this totally different thing about D.C. breaking down crime and all that. Not the same thing as this discussion, because we can't obviously point... I'm being facetious, obviously. I mean, it's so obvious that these are things they've pointed to, and states and cities that they want to go into. That's now being rationalized by the claims Trump is making. And you realize, when they do this, what do you think they're using? Palantir surveillance, the biometric testing they did in Gaza that are rolled out by ICE, the implementation of the infrastructure for what this is. That's what's happening. Now it says, all residents, excuse me, an all-seeing Orwellian surveillance system would enforce public safety. Isn't that what we keep hearing from people like Larry Ellison? And yes, it says all residents, even temporary visitors, carry an ID card with an RFID response. Now, of course, that's then. Now, clearly, we're talking about digital IDs and digital money. Now, that's a really important point that needs to be seen in this, and I'll make that more than once. The Great Reset, the digital overlap, all the things we've worried about, that is core to this idea. Surveillance, biometric, digital IDs, digital money, all of it. So if you think you're fighting that, then and you're supporting what's happening, you're actually not. All residents would carry IDs, RFID. All are genotyped and iris scanned. Public places and transportation systems track everyone. Security cameras are ubiquitous. Every car knows where it is and who is sitting in it and tells the authorities both. This is what conservatives are supporting. You see, the reality is most of them don't know this is what they're supporting. That's what the crazy part is. Vance has not advocated for realms yet, but some now I actually argue that's different. This is in 2024. I've seen many examples of him floating very similar ideas. But it says, but some of his most extreme ideas echo Yarvin. I quote, I tend to think that we should seize the institutions of the left and turn them in against the left. That's what he said. Now, yes, if you're of the mind that anything left is bad and anything right is good, that childish mindset, then maybe you think that's okay. But you realize it's not because they broke the law or because they're doing something wrong or they're stealing money. It's just because they're the left. And isn't that what we're seeing in some cases? Seizing institutions and, but not stopping them, just revamping in the direction they want to go in. USAID, for example. Now it says he predicted Trump would run again and win. So did I. So did a lot of people because I think it was pretty clear. But he says then offered some, and that was my opinion, who didn't know for sure. Then he offered some advice. Quote, I think that what Trump should do, if I was given him one piece of advice, Yarvin says, fire every single mid-level bureaucrat, every civil servant in the administrative state, replace them with our people. Now, does that mean Republicans? People on their side? Or does it mean people supporting the technocratic change? Does it mean insider Silicon Valley? That's what I think that means. He added that Trump should defy any court rule orders and that tried to halt the partisan purge of the civil service, which is what they did and are doing. It's just very, very transparent to me. And it only gets worse. Now, first, to reference some of the points that we made there, here's Mark Andreessen. Now, he made similar points on the Joe Rogan show, by the way. But here is the point where he makes the argument that democracy is bad and fake. And, the problem, which again, whether you agree with that or not, I'm not a fan of mob rule, but ultimately that oligarchs are what are going to save us. Now, I don't believe that's what Republicans think.
You said that we always end up being ruled by the elites of some kind. Can you explain this law, this idea?
So this comes from a Italian political philosopher from about 100 years ago named Robert. I'm going to let you pronounce the Italian, Michel's or Michael's. And then I learned about it through a famous book on politics, probably the best book on politics written in the 20th century, called The Machiavellians by this guy, James Burnham. Who has had a big impact on me. But in the Machiavellians, he resurrects what he calls this sort of Italian realist school of political philosophy from the 10s and 20s. And these were people, to be clear, this was not like a Mussolini thing. These were people who were trying to understand the actual mechanics of how politics actually works. So to get to the actual sort of mechanical substance of like how the political machine operates. And this guy, Michel's, had this concept he ended up with called the iron law of oligarchy. And so what the iron law of oligarchy, and I mean, take a step back to say what he meant by oligarchy, because it has multiple meanings. So basically, in classic political theory, there's basically three forms of government at core. There's democracy, which is rule of the many. There's oligarchy, which is rule of the few. And there's monarchy, which is rule of the one. Just a mechanical observation, without even saying which one's good or bad, just a structural observation. And so the question that Michel's asked was, like, is there such a thing as democracy? Like, is there actually such a thing as democracy? Is there ever actually like direct government?
Which, by the way, is a fair question. It's a valid point to investigate, to ask, right? But it's not about whether or not we should dissect the governing structure or decide that we don't need one. It's about the argument of what needs to happen to put us in the place that they claim is going to make us happy and safe and feel nothing and be happy.
And what he did was he mounted this sort of incredible historical exploration of whether democracies had ever existed in the world. And the answer basically is almost never. And we could talk about that. But the other thing he did was he sought out the most democratic private organization in the world that he could find at that point, which he concluded was some basically communist German auto workers union that was like wholly devoted to the workers of the world uniting, back when that was like the hot thing. And he went in there and he's like, okay, this is the organization out of all organizations on planet Earth that must be operating as a direct democracy. And he went in there and he's like, oh, nope, there's a leadership class. There's like 6 guys at the top and they control everything.
See, what's interesting about that, and in no way am I ever advocating, again, my point's always government is the problem. Whatever form, I think that's the problem. To make that clear, for those that want to try to argue that any nuanced point about something they don't like means you support it. You understand in history why that makes sense. Whether or not it was inorganically created for that very purpose or not, the point is that you have people who are being ruled by all absolute power dictators or authoritarians, and they recognize, look, we have the power if we collect and we recognize that we are the workforce they need and we can use that to our advantage. Right? You get where that comes from. The point is that the same thing I've always made, or point I've made, any form of government will eventually collect power at the top. Like he's pointing out, it's not unique to socialism versus democracy. It's just government, guys. We're watching it take place now. So the idea that he's basically saying, without, that's not what he wants you to think about it, but it's just, let's cut to the chase, right? Just give us the power and we'll pretend because we're the right people. It's the same broken logic about Trump. Well, he's the good guy, so it's okay he's doing the wrong thing. Maybe. Now, I disagree with you, but how long until that changes? Right? You give absolute power, no one's giving it back, just like ever in history. So I just think it's just so frustrating that people can't see through that.
And then they lead the rest of the membership along, by the nose, which is, of course, the story of every union. The story of every union is always the story of, there's a Jimmy Hoffa in there, kind of running the thing. We just saw that with the dock workers union, right? Like, there's a guy, and he's in charge. And by the way, the number 2 is his son, right? Like, that's not like an accident, right?
Yeah, and it's no different than just about any other government I've ever seen in my life. I mean, look at what we're seeing in our country or the UK. Nepotism everywhere, right? It's the same thing, right? And so maybe he argues that. My point is just to simply stand back and recognize that all of it is like that. So that's why I'm always driving towards something without government. But again, we're still seem to be far away from that understanding. But it's about what he is insinuating, arguing, and what he's written about. CARP included, all of them. They want you to believe that we need a centralized controlling power with the right mindset.
So the iron law of oligarchy basically says democracy is fake. There's always a ruling class. There's always a ruling elite structurally. And he said the reason for that is because the masses can't organize. Right.
Right. Because you're stupid and you can't do it for yourself. Now, if that's possible, if that's the reality and masses just can't organize, then explain to me how anybody ever has anywhere. How do you guys organize? It just seems like a completely invalid argument. It's about selling you on that we're inept. Society by and large is not capable of doing it. We need our betters to do it for us. That's what this stems to. It is an elitist mindset.
What's the fundamental problem? Whether the mass is 25,000 people in a union or 250 million people in a country, the masses can't organize. The majority cannot organize. Only a minority can organize. And to be effective in politics, you must organize. And
I don't necessarily agree with that. But the point is that, okay, you could take the point at face value and say that a large group is far more difficult to manage, if not impossible. That's fair. But why is the immediate, mindset here to just go to an elitist controlling structure? It doesn't have to be a small, you can, like, my point in general is that if people, we had a good conversation about this on Fine Points about the reality of people wanted to secede from this country, right? If a state wants to leave, then they should be able to. And the point was, well, it's going to keep happening. Okay, fine, then good. Then everybody breaks away. If that's the reality, the point though is that it's not some isolated 3-group, 10-group. It's about the state itself. Yeah, maybe that's still difficult, but fine. If you can see this reducing down to a group of people that's not some inner small circle that still may be able to do. I believe that that's possible, whether from a national level or a smaller state. I do believe that. I think there's historical examples of similar things. I've talked about this many times. Look, consider what he's saying. Like you should consider anybody. Listen to it, consider it. But don't fall for this idea that we're somehow incapable of doing what they know how to do. I don't believe that.
And therefore, every political structure in human history has been some form of a small organized elite ruling a large and dispersed majority. Every single one.
Which, by the way, is what most of us point out, but not because that's how it has to be, but because that's the conspiracy, even though it's not.
The Greeks and the Florentines,
theory anyway, conspiracy theories,
had brief experiments in direct democracy, and they were total disasters. In Florence, I forget the name of it. It was called like the Workers' Revolt or something like that. There was like a 2-year period where they basically experimented with direct democracy during the Renaissance, and it was a complete disaster. And they never tried it again.
Now, let me ask you something. Is that because it wasn't possible or they didn't do it right? Or because there are people like him that are stepping in there trying to seize power and manipulate? Now, yeah, maybe that's exactly why it's not possible. But yeah, it's important to think about why these things happen. I don't believe it's because we're just not capable of that. I refuse to believe that.
In the state of California, we have our own experiment on this, which is the proposition system, which is an overlay on top of the legislature. And it, anybody who looks.
I think you get the general point. It goes on for a couple more minutes. Another example. As I pointed out before, Larry Ellison, as we just read from the article about AI enforcement and surveillance to make sure everyone's on their best behavior. Well, yep, Larry Ellison was already selling you on that before we got here, because they all seem to be individually sort of driving society in this direction. Here's what he said. You probably saw this. I think I played it yesterday.
Will be on their best behavior because we're constantly recording, watching and recording everything that's going on. Citizens will be on their best behavior because we're constantly recording and reporting everything that's going on. And it's
in case you're just tuning in, the point being that people like him, including him and Andreessen and Karp and all of them, are the ones funding and driving this direction. So that matters when they're laying out for you the world they want to build, right? So is that the freedom city you envision with digital IDs and biometric scans and drones watching everything? Is that what you think you're watching? Is that what you think you're fighting for?
It's unimpeachable. The cars have cameras on them. I think we have a squad car here someplace. But those kind of applications using AI, if we can use AI, and we're using AI to monitor the video. So if that altercation that occurred in Memphis, the chief of police would be immediately notified. It's not people that are looking at those cameras, it's AI that's looking at the camera. No, you can't do this. It would be like a shooting. That's going to be immediately, that's going to be an event that's immediately, an alarm is going to go off, it's going to be, and we're going to have supervision. In other words, every police officer is going to be supervised at all times. And the supervision will, and if there's a problem, AI will report the problem and report it to the appropriate person, whether it's the sheriff or the chief or whomever we need to take control of the situation.
Okay, so let's hypothetically discuss this future in which you have these technocrat feudal lords that are basically CEOs of their little realm, as they call it, right? And so the AI sees a problem and reports it back to their feudal lord who has the all-seeing control over everything, and it turns out that it's his son, right? Oh, it's Barron Trump. Oh, it's Larry Ellison's family. What do you think they do? Right? Do you think they go, well, we have to uphold the law? Or do they go, well, it's my family and I don't care, I'm in control? Really? I mean, you can easily piece together how this is. I mean, most people, even people with principle, would probably do the same. That's the way people operate. Your family is important to you. My point is simply to highlight that's why you can't have that kind of individual, isolated, centralized power at the top, because they will eventually rule in their own favor. They will, and then very, very quickly that turns into just a king who doesn't care about you at all, which is, by the way, pretty much what it already seems to be. But you must understand that that's what they're painting for you right now. We're just supposed to believe that these people have your best interest at heart. It's quite a gamble, especially when you can prove it's not true.
We have, same thing. We have drones. If there's something going on in a shopping center, and I'll stop. A drone goes out there, get there way faster than a police car. There's no reason for, by the way, high-speed chases. You shouldn't have high-speed chases between cars. You just have a drone follow the car. I mean, it's very, very simple.
Yeah, this is the guy rolling out the Stargate platform with Trump, right? Along with SoftBank, along with Sam Altman, all of which are intertwined with this whole story. Altman included, by the way. So we just played this one. I just think it's important to include in this conversation. Here's Peter Thiel, as we showed. Hopefully this plays correctly like it did yesterday. But just that quick clip again about him in the interview, but also the joke around it of him saying, whether human species should continue. I think it's very relevant to this overlap because transhumanism, the technocracy part, it's very much a part of this. And what he's saying in here is pretty alarming. And it overlaps with this same kind of technocratic feudal mindset.
Peter, you've been doing great so far. Just some layup questions ahead, and let's bring this home.
I think you would prefer the human race to endure, right?
No way.
You're hesitating.
Yeah, well,
yes.
I don't know. I would.
Yeah. Yes. The answer is yes.
This is a long hesitation. This is a long hesitation.
There's so many questions implicit
in
this.
Should the human race survive?
Yes. The only answer is yes.
Yes.
Great.
But
fuck.
I also would like us to radically solve these problems.
Right.
And so
what is he talking? What is he talking about?
Yeah, transhumanism. Human natural body gets transformed into an immortal body, and there's a critique of, let's say, the trans people in a sexual context, or I don't know, transvestite is someone who changes their clothes and cross dresses. We want more than cross dressing or changing your sex organs. We want you to be able to change your heart and change your mind, your whole body. And then Orthodox Christianity.
Isn't that interesting, right? In this context, as more as we go forward, the idea that this is the guy, the Yarvin circle of influence. And that's what his mindset is. It's transhumanism is not a secret, distant part of this. It's it's very much involved. A couple more overlaps before we get into the next section of this. Let's not forget Vivek, who kind of exited stage left, but is still very much part of this. During the pandemic, or whatever you want to call what happened, Vivek pitched policymakers on a dystopian national surveillance system that would, in his words, segregate people based on biomarkers. Right. Now, this is Eric saying, Vivek Ramaswamy leads Ohio governor's race by 8 points. So maybe they just broke ways, or maybe they decided that he'd be more valuable running this state. Who knows? The bottom line is he's just as much a part of this as everybody else. All of this lines up with the mindset of what they're building. And it's all about the cities, the technocratic states that they're talking about, right? The Prospera version, the freedom city in this country. That's what this is about. And all of this, just wait until we get to the next part. As I was telling you, the kind of experimentation that's happening, it's overwhelming. But here, just a quick clip. You can hear him say it himself.
Tolerate a national system in which certain people on the basis of a biomarker are segregated to say you can't go back to normal life, where certain people get a head start. Is that an inequity we would tolerate? I personally think that it is better than the status quo. If we can send 10 or 20% of the people back on the basis of having immunity that's proven on the basis of a lab-based result. That's now
what's interesting is, of course, this comes at the angle of we are being told we don't have it because, that's like the COVID time. This is how they use these things. And so, yes, it's, of course, it fits in. It's a solution for you, right? To get your blood, you get your samples taken and check for biomarkers, and we'll prove you've got immunity, but a hell of a lot more than that. And then maybe segregate you based on those things, but maybe based on something entirely different than about whether you got COVID or whatever. It's just so shocking how these people were framed as something. What they are, I think, is quite obvious. So here's an article that I think ending this point about Curtis Yarvin that I think adds to this whole bigger picture. Elon Musk consulted Curtis Yarvin, right-wing thinker, on his third party, which, by the way, seems to have sort of petered out for now, but I get the sense it's not going anywhere. But it just shows you how immersed this all is, guys. Everyone is tapping into this direction. Now, Prospera is an important part of this. Now, 2017 is when this really started. It is funded by people like, by specifically Peter Thiel, Mark Andreessen, and even Sam Altman. Okay, it all overlaps with this, and you know what I think. It's what we just discussed. It'll be more clear as we finish out this part. But what I want to include in this is, so we just talked about the DC overlap with kind of the philosophy behind what this is before we even get into what these freedom cities look like. But here in 2017, I covered this in 2024, is an important overlap to this. And I think what it was, along with a few of these I've said before, is like a trial balloon, as a test to see, as, by the way, what they call it a test. I'll read for you directly from their own statements. This is a test. As even Trump pointed out, that DC was a test. As they're not supposed to say that, but that's all a test. Now, you could argue a test to see how this would work elsewhere, or maybe not. But even that seems like a little bit of a statement they maybe didn't want to put out, because it wasn't supposed to be a test. We were told this was one thing. We're getting rid of all the crime. Now it turns out it was a test to see, right? I think we get the sense there's something much bigger happening here. But this story is important. They're all involved with the funding, which I'll prove to you more in a second if you haven't seen it already, of this location. Now, the simple reality is, I'll probably read some of this redundantly on the article we get to, but the reality is simply that they manipulated the situation. 2009, illegal coup from the United States, overthrew the country of Honduras. Very easy to look up. Okay, so then there was an opening. People were put in place, but the court still existed that was different from that power control. And ultimately, they then tried to take this special autonomous zone for themselves. Now, when they tried, of course, they were trying to designate it as the ZD, or, the autonomous zone. And the court said no, which I think we do read. I'll read in a second. And what they do, well, they removed the judges, put people they liked in place, then they got the designation, all of which is illegal, right? The whole thing. Then, of course, they jumped forward and people in power in Honduras then said, we don't want you here anymore, and revoked that status, and they didn't care. And instead, they sued them for basically a third of the entire GDP of Honduras, which I've always pointed out, when that potentially resolves, if they win, which people think they will, the New York Times said they're probably going to win. What does it look like when Prospera owns a vast portion, a controlling section of the resources and assets of the government? Do they effectively become the governing power? It seems that way to me. So then you have Honduras's government as sort of like this flimsy stand-in who doesn't even really have control. That's the transition of power. But overall, the point is that right now, even the leader of Honduras claims the U.S. government's trying to regime change them again. Maybe for something else, maybe to make this stick. I don't know. You can decide for yourself. But watch this show. This is important to understand. The technocratic regime change under the guise of freedom, technocrats are slowly taking control. That was September 2024. Important show to watch, but let's go further. First, the Pronomos capital is a very central part of this. And this is Peter Thiel, it's Andreessen, it's this is like the funding arm, at least one part of it. You got the Founders Fund, you've got a few of these different mechanisms they use, but this one, as far as I can tell, seems to be the one that is tied to all the Freedom City stuff, all of the Prospera stuff, all the points we're making. It all seems to tie back to Pronomos capital, which is then Peter Thiel and all the rest. Same point. Oh, this is which, by the way, 3,000 followers. Now, that's not, here's what this tells me, just very simply. They have a hell of a lot of influence and power. If they wanted to be known and acknowledged, they would be. But the fact that they've got 30 or 3,000 followers and that people don't even seem to know the name says that they don't want to be seen. At the very least, not yet. And I think that speaks volumes. You know what I'm saying? Like, if they wanted this to be the big Pronomos capital that everyone talks about, then this, how easy that would be for them to throw it into the limelight. And all the politicians would follow it and everybody would talk about it. But no, it's, I think for a reason, boxed out. Now it's on the contact page for some reason. Here's the page of the Pronomos capital. You can check out for yourself. Better laws, better lives. Now, here's what Grok had to say about what is the current reality of Prospera and Honduras. I've told you all this already, but I wanted just to show you this quick breakdown from Grok, from a right-leaning, controlled, manipulated AI that ultimately shows you that even at the surface level, these things are very important. They're on the surface. I get pushback from these statements from people that I've talked about this in many different circles, and these points are very clearly provable. And yet I get pushback from people when I bring it up in certain circles. Legal challenges to what's going on. Now, what this top part is describing the rollout, like I just said. Semi-autonomous private city. I didn't say this before. This is in the original show, though. The Roatan Island is where the main location is. And it's operating as what they call a zone for employment and economic deployment, ZD, or a special autonomous zone, which I often point out is a section right out of the Sustainable Development Goals. I think that obviously overlaps to this. But it says backing from Peter Thiel and Andreessen from Pronomos Capital. So the point is, it goes on to list the population, different things. I want to highlight on the legal challenges. In 2022, President Xiomara Castro's administration repealed the ZD law, like I just told you, deeming it unconstitutional because it flatly is. In September 2024, the Honduras Supreme Court ruled ZDs retroactively unconstitutional, threatening their legal foundation. What do you mean threatening? It's legally not even allowed to be there anymore. And they don't care. Think about how crazy that is. Honduras Prospera Inc. filed a $10.8 billion lawsuit against Honduras in the World Bank's arbitration tribunal. Perfect. Claiming lost future returns. Think about how crazy that is. You do this illegally, and then you somehow, because of how powerful you are, you could just sue them for billions of dollars going through the World Bank and claim that you're losing returns from an illegal venture that you put into place illegally. In what world? In their world, does that make sense? This amount is roughly a third of Honduras's GDP. Local resistance, particularly from the Garifuna community in Crawfish Rock, which I've mentioned many times, cites environmental damage, which I haven't even talked about, by the way. But for me, it's more about the encroachment and land grab, but apparently environmental damage too. Disrupted water supplies, flooding. Doesn't that sound familiar? Like every other AI data center that we're seeing today? And it says, and lack of consultation. Community leaders like Vanessa Cardenas and Louisa Connor have been vocal critics, meaning that, and the point was that Crawfish Rock is one of the places arguing that they're being like absorbed into this. So if this is some kind of an allowed area, then why are they expanding? Why are they absorbing more territory? It's because it's not what it sounds like. In October 2024, Roatan's mayor, Ron McNabb, ordered a temporary closure of Prospera's offices for unpaid municipal taxes of $478,000, rejecting its claim of sovereignty. Right. So there's a mayor of an island that there are, like, see, what does that mean? So is he not really in charge? Is he just basically a stand-in? Like, this is a transition. Now they're trying to push back. So they're claiming we have sovereignty, but of course they set it up illegally. And the idea is that they owe them $500,000 anyway. And it goes on to say critics, including locals and 85 global economists, view Prospera as a form of neocolonialism, exploiting land and resources while bypassing Honduran laws. Unregulated medical trials is so important to me right now. This is very clear. I'll show you some examples. Minicircle, I think, was one company of bioengineering. They're unregulated medical trials, and God knows what else is happening, including gene editing at facilities like, there it is, Minicircle, have sparked investigations by Honduras's Ministry of Health in 2024. They're doing unregulated medical experimentation using genetics, gene editing, bioengineering. That's terrifying. Now, and what do you think the U.S. is doing there? I guarantee you there are other governments involved that are doing all sorts of things that there's nobody watching. The project's ties to former President Juan Orlando Hernandez, now imprisoned in the United States for drug trafficking, have fueled accusations of being a narco regime. You realize Prospera has ties to somebody the U.S. government has in jail for drug trafficking. I cover all this in that first show. It hosts events like biotech summits and promotes itself as a model for global network states. That's the point, guys. So you'll see these intersection points of Curtis Yarvin's patchwork states, the network states, the startup city point, the Israel overlap. It's all the same language. It's the same idea. Prospera remains operational, but is embroiled in legal, political, and social conflicts. Its future hinges on the outcome of the arbitration lawsuits and Honduras' ability to enforce its laws. That seems pretty important to me. Now, this is one we've read before, but just to include it for even foreign policy. How a startup utopia became a nightmare for Honduras. It's not a utopia. Now, the startup thing is interesting, of course, as from the Wired article as well. Startup city, because of the whole startup nation thing, which is, by the way, what they also used before they changed the title, which is usually referenced Israel, right? That's their whole Unit 8200 startup where they were populating businesses. We're not going to get into that more today. The point, though, is that this is the same model. Here is the Times of India. Prospera, a startup city in Honduras with investments by Peter Thiel, Sam Altman. It's pretty easy to see all of this overlaps. Now, where this gets most concerning to me with considering Washington, D.C. point is where this then intersects with the Freedom City point, which I've already said many times, but to see it, to understand that this Prospera alarming reality is completely on the surface connected with the Freedom City rollout. And they even mention it as an example of what they want to do. Now, I didn't know exactly that when I covered this in 2024, but I was exactly right based on what I saw in the information. Watch it for yourself. That's what it looks like to be actually correct, not throwing out 75 different things and getting one of them right and then only pointing to that one when you look back. The reality was it was pretty clear to see that this was going in that direction. But at the time, I said, this is my opinion, but we can now see that. Now, this is from the New York Times, the New York Times. Oh, it is New York Times Magazine. The for-profit city that might come crashing down. This is from 2024. The Honduran government wants it gone. It says, Prospera has become particularly well known for the zone's experimental medical facilities. I just think that's so incredible to me with what we just went through. And like, remember Donald Trump? I mean, how much you want to bet, by the way, and this just popped into my head, that with the supposedly no more gain of function executive order, which actually outlined that they'd be the leaders in the world of the kinds that they support, how much you want to bet that's happening in these locations? Where, I mean, in most cases, there's people that want that to stop entirely, which they pretend they want, but they don't. And even in the United States or other places they've done it, there are still restrictions, but not in places like this. But it says, the week of my visit, the author Patry Friedman, grandson of the economist Milton Friedman, and the founder of a startup cities fund that invested in Prospera, had a chip with his Tesla key implanted in his hand. On a previous trip, he brushed his teeth with genetically modified bacteria purported to prevent cavities. Another time, he was injected with a protein booster intended to make him stronger and faster, as he put it at a conference in the Roatan that weekend. These are the people, this is what they're doing, guys. This is the horror. I mean, look, you may not think that matters since it's them doing it, but what happens if they're talking about something like self-spreading technology or self-amplifying self-amplifying injections or any number of things we've talked about, or nanotechnology? What happens if something then becomes something they can't contain? What if they make a mistake? That's crazy, especially since in a lot of ways, even your tax dollars are ending up in their pockets. It's terrifying to me. It says, in promotional materials, Prospera markets itself to the 21st century pioneers. Right. Isn't that what Trump was saying? The new, the manifest destiny of the United States, revamping the pioneer spirit. It's the same point. It's the same mindset, ideology, framing. Prospera's original investment plan projected that by 2030, what an interesting way to aim. Why would they aim at 2030? Who knows? The city would be home to 38,000 residents, and that foreign direct investment in the country would top $500 million. Now, I don't actually think it's connected, but it's an interesting number, seeing as how they're pulling $500 million over here. And then, it's like, but I just interesting overlap. I mean, that money, I think, is actually going on to self-amplifying shots for the whole vaccine direction in regard to RFK. My point, though, is that by 2030, they'd have this, and by foreign direct investment. So who else is investing in Prospera that we don't get to see? Probably, or not, Israel for sure. Probably places like the authoritarian states of the world, which clearly are the leading allies of the West regime right now. But it says several others are under development, including the East Solano Plan, run by a real estate corporation that has spent the last 7 years buying up $900 million of ranch land in the East Bay to build a privatized alternative to San Francisco called Praxis. Now, isn't it funny how the right will criticize, rightly so, Bill Gates buying up all the farmland, China, yes, those things should matter. But why doesn't it matter when the techno-fascists do it from the conservative side? Because we don't talk about it. It's been going on a long time. I'm willing to bet you pointing at Gates was sort of a way to stop you from seeing things like this, but both should matter. I mean, we've talked about the farmland right now being destroyed because of what they're doing with immigration. It seems like they're all going in the same direction with different justifications. But another example, a freedom city called Praxis, a forthcoming what they call crypto state on the Mediterranean. Now, this is the same conversation. In fact, it even turns out it's funded by Peter Thiel. A startup linked to Peter Thiel wants to build the next great city in Greenland. Funded to a tune of $525 million, Praxis aims to revitalize Western civilization. Isn't that funny? Totally separate thing, I guess, even though it's clearly not. You're seeing this all over the world. And I think you're right now watching it begin in this country. They are doing this. It's not a secret. They're literally building some of these autonomous areas that are basically through strong arm tactics, forcing places to give up area and taking control of it, or in some cases trying and failing. It says, and the Free Republic of Liberland, a 3 square mile stretch of unclaimed floodplain between Serbia and Croatia. That, guess what? They're also funding Peter Thiel, Mark Andreessen. Yeah, all the same people. It's almost like they're doing the same thing all over the world, because they are. Many of the same ideological aligned names, Balaji Srinivasan, Peter Thiel, Mark Andreessen, Friedman, recur as financial backers. Patrick Schumacher, principal of the Ada Hadid Architects and a critic of public housing, is behind several of their urban or metaversal designs. Srinivasan, the former Coinbase chief technology officer who's involved, we pointed this out before, and now an advisor to Pronomos Capital, Friedman's fund to build startup cities, argued in his 2022 book, The Network State. Right, just in those 2 paragraphs, you can see the connection between places like Prospera, places like Freaxi, or what is it called, Praxis, and now the Freedom City Network State conversation, because it's the same point. If you think I'm being redundant, I am. I'm trying to drill this idea into people's minds so we can see what's happening. And it says these new business-friendly hubs would soon compete with nation states and one day replace them. network state was inspired, he said, by the state of Israel. That's not a joke. It even says, what I'm really calling for is something like tech Zionism, when a community forms online and then gathers in physical space to form a reverse diaspora. Literally saying that this conversation, the network state, the idea of the freedom cities, Prospera, in his mind, started or is framed, inspired by the state of Israel. I mean, guys, this is being written at a time when the genocide is in full swing. Imagine even pointing to something like that. And on top of that, that he literally says he's calling for what he frames as tech Zionism. If you think this is just me inserting this, guys, I didn't expect that to be in the article. I'm looking at this from the point of freedom cities, overlaps, and I almost fell out of my chair. It's obvious because I pointed out that Israel is a central player in what this is. Goes on to say, a tumultuous 3 years followed. Romer and the oversight board he helped set up were sidelined, and this is back to the Prospera, sidelined, and the Honduras Supreme Court, this is what I've been telling you, initially rejected the constitutional amendment. They needed an amendment to allow the special zone. So first, they pushed an amendment that nobody wanted. Then the Supreme Court rejected that, but Congress, led by Hernandez, dismissed the 4 opposing judges. This is the New York Times. Not like that makes it true, but you can prove this. They literally just removed the judges who ruled against them. What's funny is I say these things in passing, and I feel like people act like I'm being hyperbolic. I am rarely being hyperbolic, guys. It's very clear what happened. And the point is, the Congress, they dismissed 4 of the judges that were opposing what they wanted in what some called a technical coup. Hernandez, who succeeded Lobo as president of Honduras, continued to have a career marred by corruption and was recently sentenced to 45 years in the United States for drug trafficking. Right? So the guy who literally allowed this to take place is currently in prison in the United States. Think about how ridiculous that is. In 2013, Honduras amended its constitution to allow for the creation of autonomous zones because of what they did. They've literally forced this in using criminals who are currently in prison in the United States. Now it says Prospera has now incorporated 222 businesses into the autonomous zone, the ZD, including an outsourced staffing agency and scores of experimental medical centers. MiniCircle, founded by 2 young biohackers, offers a product that they say might cure Alzheimer's and suppress all tumors, or, give you myocarditis and kill you all, but, we'll find out. Lamboyant Labs manufactures implants that turn people into self-sovereign cyborgs. Not a joke. The Bay Islands Fitness and Transformation Center, these are all in Prospera, offers affordable semaglutinin injections, and the Global Alliance for Regenerative Medicine provides stem cell treatments. A man sitting next to me on my flight from Roatan showed me severe burns on his arm that he'd come to treat at the clinic. While I was visiting, a pop-up city called Vitalia used a dome it had erected on Prospera's grounds to host events for biotech innovators who want to, quote, make death optional. This is a wet dream for technocrats and transhumanists, guys. They're literally doing anything that they can't do anywhere else, it seems. But look, maybe just like with Neuralink, maybe this guy has a burn, goes there and gets, treatment he can't get anywhere else. I can understand how that's clearly an overlap to this. And maybe that's even what they're really trying to accomplish. But you must by now be able to see, especially with the ideology I just painted for you of the people doing this, that this is not in the best interest of any of the things we're talking about. Or at the very least, I hope you can consider that, because I think it's pretty obvious. So, lastly, here is the overlap to the many different examples. We pretty much already painted the picture, but here's Wired again. Startup City. Groups say they're meeting Trump officials to push for deregulated freedom cities. So the point to see this, the timing is the way I'm presenting this, right? The DC thing we clearly see is happening, right? We went to the Prospera point. Now what we're seeing is, and this is, the article is, where's the date again? March 2025, right? So March of this year, you had the Andreessens, the Karp, everyone we listed off. You had these kind of people approaching the White House, or people in power, or people in their local states, are saying, we want this to happen. We want to roll out deregulated freedom cities. It says the architects of projects like Prospera are drafting legislation to create U.S. cities that would be free from federal regulations. Several groups representing startup cities Tech hubs exempt from the taxes and regulations that apply to the countries where they are located are drafting congressional legislation to create freedom cities in the United States that would be similarly free from certain federal laws, Wired has learned. Trey Goff, the chief of staff of the startup city known as Prospera, tells Wired that he and other Prospera representatives working under an advocacy group called the Freedom Cities Coalition, remember that, have been meeting with the Trump administration about the idea in recent weeks. What's funny is I've been making these points. I mean, when I first talked about this and I first saw the Freedom City, I said, that feels like the same thing. And here we are. The point is clearly that the people of Prospera are modeling this, or rather the Freedom City direction, on what they're doing there. You know how much pushback I got for simply suggesting that? It's literally being promoted at this point. He claims the administration has been very receptive. In 2023, Trump floated the idea of creating 10 freedom cities. Now Goff says that Prospera's vision is to create not just 10, but as many as the market can handle. That can't be any more clear. Get ready to have Prospera Freedom City, or rather technocratic hellscapes, taking over our country, if they get what they want. They hope to have drafted legislation ready by the end of the year. Here's where Trump pointed that out in case you forgot.
Past generations of Americans pursued big dreams and daring projects that once seemed absolutely impossible. They pushed across an unsettled continent and built new cities in the wild frontier.
Oh, it was unsettled, was it? I mean, what kind of stupidity does it take to even say something like that? Unsettled? Why? Because he's a colonialist occupier, just like the rest of them we're talking about. Like, I mean, you understand he's very aware that there was an entire civilization that existed in this country. But the point is, you're not supposed to say those things, just like you're not supposed to acknowledge Palestinians exist. It's just insulting. And that's not some woke point to make. It's just acknowledging the facts.
They transformed American life with the interstate highway system. Magnificent it was. And they launched a vast network of satellites into orbit all around the earth. But today, our country has lost its boldness. Under my leadership, we will get it back in a very big way. If you look at just...
Yeah, maybe they will, right? They're sure as hell being bold. You have to understand, as always, what they're saying. When they say we, they mean them.
3 years ago, what we were doing was unthinkable. How good it was, how great it was for our country.
Right, because COVID-19 was so amazing. Right, that's the time frame. But he does. He thinks that. He said many times, the greatest thing, every Republican and Democrat thinks the same. COVID-19 warp speed was the greatest thing ever. He just said that again.
Our objective will be a quantum leap in the American standard of living. That's what will happen.
You feeling that so far?
Here are just a few of the ways we can do it. Almost 1/3 of the land mass of the United States is owned by the federal government.
Which is a crime, period. In any situation, well, let's just say unconstitutional. The federal government is not supposed to be owning land. But, there's a ton of things we could point out that are directly contradictory to the Constitution, but that shows you how broken our government is today, or rather just completely, willfully misguided.
With just a very, very small portion of that land, just a fraction, 0.5%. Would you believe that? We should hold a contest to charter up to 10 new cities and award them to the best proposals for development.
And who do you think is going to be putting those proposals forward? Yeah, I think Palantir's got one coming. It's like that's exactly what you're going to get. But realize the idea of this, you realize how much land, for example, that like the Bureau of Land Management controls. I mean, that may sound like what he's saying, and I certainly hope if they have to take land and they're going to do this, at least to be from somebody they're not stealing it from. The point is that I don't think that's what it's going to be. I think we're watching what it's going to be. But, well, I guess we'll have to wait and see how it plays out. Like DC and Chicago, as opposed to land that's already taken by the government that they're not currently using. That's what I'm talking about. I don't think that's what it's going to be. As always, they frame it as what makes sense when ultimately it's unusual. It's not usually the direction it ends up. Like the original narrative is rarely what actually happens.
In other words, we'll actually build new cities in our country again. These freedom cities will reopen the frontier, reignite American imagination, and give hundreds of thousands of young people and other people, all hardworking families, a new shot at home ownership.
Sure. Do you think that's how it's going to work out? I hope so. At least in the sense that there's some benefit to people, whatever happens. But the reality seems far from that with where we currently are. Now it says he claims the administration has been very receptive. And Trump floated the idea of doing this. You just heard that. The energy in D.C. is absolutely electric, Goff says. You can tell in meetings with the people involved that they have the mandate to do some of the more hyperbolic, verbose things Trump has mentioned. According to Goff, Freedom Cities Coalition has briefed White House officials on 3 options, for Freedom Cities. One is through interstate compacts. In this scenario, 2 or more states could set aside territories with shared tax and regulation policies, which with some state-specific carve-outs. Under existing law, these compacts can't be revoked. They can be dissolved under certain circumstances. Now, let me ask you this. Let's just say this happens, right? And then there's this middle ground between these states. What about the people in that area? What if those people decide they don't want to be a part of this anymore? Or what if the state as a whole decides we want to break away from this whole country? You know, my point is that this is not, we don't live in that world anymore if we ever did. The government will never, ever, any side of it, let Texas or California secede because they need it. We don't live in the world we think we do. They want you to think that's there, just like they want you to think that we can, remove the government if we feel it's not doing its job, as the Constitution literally states. No, you do that, you're a terrorist. Right? We don't live in the world we think we do. The idea here is that they're trying to make it sound like we do this in a way that's going to benefit everybody. It's not. As we can see in the places they've already done it. It says the 2 other options are creating federal enclaves with special economic and jurisdictional zones, or having Trump issue executive orders to create each one of the freedom cities. Yeah, so exactly like what we're seeing right now. Whether it's the special zones or the emergency statements and executive orders. Well, that's where we are. Freedom Cities Coalition was created by an entity called Niue Capital LLC, which owns several trademarks for Prospera. It's just very obvious how the overlap. Since opening on the Honduran island of Roatan in 2020, Prospera has been attracting tech workers and startups by promising low taxes, few regulations. I mean, few, why wouldn't there be none if that's the whole point, right? And it says, and a business-like government that considers its citizens to be akin to customers. Its financiers include Pronomos Capital, a venture capital firm backed by Peter Thiel, Mark Andreessen, and Coinbase, which we already covered. Notably, the current government of Honduras considers Prospera and its special zone atomic status to be illegal. Funny, you'd think that would matter. However, many Honduran citizens opposed Prospera. The Honduran Congress passed a law in 2022 repealing the allowance of these zones, and Prospera sued the Honduras government shortly after. The lawsuit's currently ongoing, as we reported earlier. Donald Trump mentioned the idea of freedom cities on the campaign trail in March 2023. He promised that if he was elected president, he would hold a contest, as you just heard, to pick 10 winners to build new cities. Trump hasn't referred to the idea since, right? Because that's, he plants that idea, and then, they do something different. I mean, we've seen that. It's not unique to left and right or even Trump, but we continue to see that right now. The framing, the narrative, and then a complete deviation. But the screamers will make you pretend everything's going to plan. We're winning. It's not just a marketing tactic. They take it very literally, Goff says. So this is the guy talking about. He's the Freedom Cities Coalition who's talking to the White House. And what he's telling you is this is not just marketing, guys. They take this seriously. He says, referring to members of Trump's team, quote, they intend to follow through with all of the promises they made on the campaign trail. That's what he says. He adds that members of these groups are having, quote, casual conversations with people in the White House, in addition to Republican and Democrat members of Congress, simply to show you that it is not partisan, guys. All of them want the power that will gain from this. One company that stands to benefit from the rise of freedom cities is MiniCircle, who we mentioned before, a longevity biotech company focused on developing gene therapies to extend human lifespans. The company's seed funding came from Peter Thiel and OpenAI Sam Altman, and it currently has offices in Texas and in Prospera. Many of the industries Allen says he hopes to foster in freedom cities: energy, nuclear, semiconductors, fantastic, and defense technology are not coincidentally ones a lot of venture capital is going towards as funding moves away from the SaaS digital and intent consumer brands. Why do you think that is? But the point being is they're going in a direction that goes away from what usual venture capitalists would get, because it's not about even making money, guys. It's about government. I mean, look at what they just listed off. What we're investing is energy, nuclear, semiconductors, defense technology. Yeah, so you're a government. You are literally a government structure. You're rolling out a control structure. I think we can all see that. And it says, and this is just interesting, Wired has changed the term startup nation to startup cities to more accurately indicate that it's a political subdivision. The point was, this is what it originally said. Startup nation. I think that's very telling, don't you? Because that's what we're talking about, right? That's what the point I just made. It is a new country. That's what they're trying to create. But that they got pushed back because they don't want you to know that, I think. So they got forced to change it. Now, last point here, last few points. Going back to the point of DC, right? Now that we've walked through it all, thinking about what they're currently doing. On August 6th, we talked about Trump and Musk both calling to federalize Washington, D.C. So with this in mind, let's consider this again. This clip that, again, complete rumor, at least, unverified at the very least, that this woman says that she independently heard from many people left and right in D.C. where she works that Trump was going to hand over D.C. to Peter Thiel. Now, again, when it first came out, which was well before it kind of made the current rounds, I didn't share it because I'm like, how do you verify something like that? But as this continues to develop with all the information we have, it's kind of hard not to at least consider what this is. With what we just painted for you, what's currently happening in DC and other cities, and the Thiel kind of Pronomos capital funding for all of it. I mean, if that happened tomorrow, would that even be a shock? They just literally, how about they argue that, well, we need to maintain the safe DC we've created, right? So let's allow whatever it is, something to come in and keep it that way. And whether that's Thiel funding or some side group or them Palantir themselves or whatever, this is something I expect. I hope I'm wrong, as always, because this is obviously not what anybody should want. But let's play this clip again to remember what she said and think about how all this ties together with this, whether it is Thiel or not. The idea that the DC thing or the rest of the cities potentially are what we just talked about today.
Politics, and I just got back from a trip in Washington, D.C., and I want to tell you the absolutely unhinged rumor I heard from current and former federal workers and people on Capitol Hill about what Donald Trump is about to do next, because if it's true, it will alter the course of American history forever. I want to preface this by saying I'm not a journalist. What I'm about to share with you is just a rumor, though I did hear it from multiple people who do not know each other from multiple areas of the federal government. So with all those disclaimers, I'm going to share this with you anyway, because I think you deserve to know. Long story short, Donald Trump is trying to give Washington, D.C. to billionaire Peter Thiel. I mean that literally, not figuratively. Like, he is trying to give a billionaire control over the land and the people within Washington, D.C. The specific rumor is that instead of granting Washington, D.C. statehood like its residents have been demanding for years, he wants to actually roll back the little bit of independence that they already have of self-government. Apparently, he's considering turning the district into what some call a freedom city. Proponents of freedom cities advocate for areas and territories that are governed and owned completely by corporations, so essentially corporate colonies. So there's no federal government oversight, there's no state government oversight. Essentially, these freedom cities are ruled by CEO kings. So from what I'm hearing, the Trump administration is exploring abusing DC's existing status as a district to make it the first freedom city and give it to his billionaire buddy, Peter Thiel. This is a disaster for reasons I shouldn't have to elaborate on. Obviously, that would set an incredibly dangerous precedent. It's hugely symbolic to give the area where the federal government runs to a billionaire. We're really talking about a new era of colonization rooted in techno-fascism. And while this particular rumor is new, Trump's association with people who lobby for the creation of freedom cities is well known, and they were at his inauguration. I know it sounds far-fetched, but we really should start fighting against this now before it becomes a reality.
Agreed. And what's interesting is, and when that first came out, I mean, well before this video was circulating, even before when I first saw it, this was something we were discussing, like this very overlap. But it's really hard not to think about how clear that seems. Now, look, as we've known in the past, so there can be many different plans laid out with multiple possible outcomes. And so now, and I think this is happening a lot right now, where people are not buying the narratives right now. People are pushing back on a lot of things. And so maybe DC was the plan or one of the possible plans, and now that people are pointing to it and highlighting it, maybe it'll be something else. Or maybe that's not true at all. But the ultimate point is, with the information we have, the facts in front of us, this seems almost likely. Whether DC is going to happen, or even just the overlap of what the transition of power, whether you think freedom cities are what this is or not, we are watching a transition of power. This is so very clear to me. Now, this is a couple more points on the overlapping Freedom City, the conversation, which is important. This is City Journal saying, this is from the date was December 2024. In March 2023, President-elect Donald Trump proposed building a new 10 new freedom cities to unleash American innovation. Trump envisioned these cities as hubs to revive American manufacturing. It says, what makes the Freedom City movement novel is its federal government-led approach to creating deregulated new cities. Moreover, modern economies emphasized agglomeration. I thought that said something else when I first read that. A mass or collection of things. The cluster of industries in dominant hubs like New York, finance. I think it's interesting. New York, San Francisco, Los Angeles. See, this is the point I was making. Like right now, those are the ones they're aiming at for the claim of crime and immigration, but just so happen to be some of the most important locations when it comes to the technocratic transition. That's what I think it really comes down to. And it says, federal agencies need to take a more active role if new cities are to arise. Such government-led efforts in urban creation have varying degrees of success. Many fail, but those that flourish sometimes do so spectacularly. Two of the most prominent examples are St. Petersburg, Russia, and Shenzhen, China. So I guess it's interesting to talk about them modeling Russia and China, if that's the way you want to look at it. But it says, with backing from some Silicon Valley's most successful investors and entrepreneurs, California Forever set out to find a new city. The company has acquired more than 50,000 acres of land about 60 miles northeast of San Francisco and is lobbying for a ballot initiative to rezone the land from agriculture to urban use. So guess who funds California Forever? Peter Thiel, Mark Andreessen. So you have to understand that this is a very common thing. It's all the same conversation. California Forever, the billionaire-backed city that no one asked for. Both Peter Thiel and Mark Andreessen are involved with California Forever, a proposed master plan community in Solano, California. Mark Andreessen is a known investor. He put in $1 billion. $1 billion. Peter Thiel involvement is less direct but significant. He's a major figure in the network state movement, which aligns with the broader vision of the tech-driven utopian cities like California Forever. Thiel, along with Andreessen, is an investor in Pronomos Capital, which is the central part in all of this. It says, our favorite possibility of Presidio National Park, though much smaller than Guantanamo Bay or Lowry Ridge, its location is ideal. San Francisco is the world's tech capital, despite its many problems. The federal government can help San Francisco unleash its full potential. Clearly, they like this idea. By developing Presidio. With Paris-level density and 6-story apartment buildings, a developed Presidio would add 120,000 residents, increasing San Francisco's population by 15%. Further, given the city's existing talent density, a Presidio featuring a liberalized biotechnology regime would quickly become a world innovation leader in this sector. America deserves a Bay Area that can compete. Turning Presidio into a freedom city could be an important step in that direction. I mean, this everywhere you look, you've got Democrats, you've got Republicans openly calling for what this is happening. I mean, isn't it weird to see people like Hillary Clinton praising Trump's direction? Like, are we now starting to feel like a weird synergy taking place where you've got the globalist techno billionaires sitting at Trump's inauguration? Guys, you see it, okay? We just got to start being honest about all this. Mark Andreessen's family plans to build a visionary subdivision near the proposed California Forever utopia. They're involved in all of this, is the point. Now I'm going to play this clip because I only got 2 more points after this because I think it's important. You have probably seen it, those that watch this show regularly, but this needs to be seen in the context of what we discussed because this is the world they're building. As you can look at the conversations they have about what they want, the digital IDs, the biometric scans, the drone surveillance, everything. That's what they're discussing when they talk about the freedom cities. I just made that very clear, even though still you'll get pushback from people that don't want to accept it without looking for themselves. This World Economic Forum vision is exactly what they're rolling out. And as I said, if you have an Amazon Echo or another form of smart device in your home, you need to watch this. Beyond the current dystopian surveillance, very important to understand geofencing coming to a freedom city near you. This is Aman Jabi speaking in what's called The Agenda, their vision for the future.
One man who knows the dangers only too well is Aman Jabi, who was at the forefront of digital development in Silicon Valley, California, for 25 years. He left when he recognized the dark side of surveillance technology, choosing instead the peace and beauty of Montana. He's an expert in facial recognition.
It's a technique that is used to uniquely identify the biometrics of any face. So, in a device like your smartphone, and most modern smartphones in the last 5 or 7 years, they have a 3D camera module in the front of the phone, which you cannot see. Within that module is a near-infrared projector, which projects tens of thousands of dots on your face. Those dots are then distorted based on the contours and the features of your face. And there's a near-infrared camera then takes a picture of that distortion, captures it, and then reverse engineers the exact profile of your face. In the longer term, facial recognition will be used to unlock your digital identity, which is going to be a tool of control for the agendas that are coming down the pipeline.
Elements of that control are already with us.
Alexa, good morning. Good morning.
You are never alone in your home, and this is why. All your devices at home and all smart appliances, they are all connected on a wireless network. Many of these devices will have cameras, many will have microphones, and so they are monitoring everything all the time. Your smart appliances are communicating with the smart meter and sending it real-time usage data. If there's a Ring camera also in your home, a mesh network is formed, and all your devices are being tracked within the home, its location, its usage, and all the data is going to Amazon servers. When you leave your home, all modern vehicles are connected to the internet, so your automobile is being tracked all the time. When you're going under a string of smart LED poles and smart LED lights on the highway and in the streets of your towns and cities, those form a wireless network and are tracking your vehicle. They are tracking all the devices on you, from smartphones to smartwatches when you're walking on the streets. So data is being collected 24/7 continuously on every human being whenever you are within these wireless networks. And it's obviously not good for health also because of all the electromagnetic radiation. In the long term, the plan is to pretty much lock up humanity in smart cities, which is kind of a superset of a 15-minute city. They've sold all the state and local governments and countries that smart cities are about sustainability and the good of the city. But in reality, the language from the UN and WEF and their white papers is all inverted. So, air monitoring is really about limiting mobility and no car ownership. Right? Surveillance, control via LED grid is why the smart lighting is there. Water management is about water rationing, noise pollution is about speed surveillance, traffic monitoring is about limiting mobility, and then, of course, energy conservation is all about rationing heat, electricity, and gasoline. Another concept one should be familiar with is called geofencing, and that's, think of it as an invisible fence around you, where you cannot go beyond a certain point, and that will be related to your face recognition, digital identity, and access control. Your smart contracts, SoftBrick can turn off your digital currency beyond a certain point from your house. Our world has been turned into a digital panopticon. That means you can be monitored, analyzed, managed, and monetized.
Surveillance capitalists are already making billions of dollars selling our information to big corporations, because this kind of detailed knowledge enables them to predict and influence our behavior.
That last part's especially important. Digital twins and all that we've talked about, that's what it comes down to. So, a few last parts that I want to include in this conversation. There's another example of a potential freedom city that we have to mention. Now, it's not as defined, but it has been pointed to, and there's a couple points I want to make. So, tomorrow we're going to be talking about Israel. I put it off again today. There's so much I want to get to, including still the conversation of the Israeli government entity that's directly under Netanyahu, who was allowed to leave, even though he was caught in a child sex sting. Our government allowed that. in the midst of covering up the Epstein conversation is just mind-blowing. We'll talk about, but plenty of more important stories on top of that about what they're doing. In fact, I was just looking online. It looks like Israel's currently using gas on Palestinians. Overwhelming. We're going to get to it more tomorrow. The point is, here's an overlap of Gaza with this conversation. Dropsite News says Trump backs Israel launching a full military operation to take over Gaza. You know, the thing they kept screaming was never even on the table, never going to happen. You're an anti-Semite, but now we're taking it all and they have to go. We're ethically cleansing all of them because they don't deserve to live. Smotrich is literally saying that. But everyone ignores it because we're all racist, apparently. Dismissing pleas from the families of Israeli captives who are urging a deal that ends the war. You know why? As we keep, remember in the beginning, they kept claiming they're protesting for you to end the war. No, they're protesting for you, Israel, to end the war. They're literally marching through the streets with pictures of dead Gaza children at this point, saying, accept the deal, end the war. And they invert that into somehow they're screaming at you to release the hostages. It's just so gross what's happening. President Trump says, I actually think they're safer in many ways. You're not going to believe what he says here. The point is, Gaza is considered potentially one of the locations in all this conversation. Maybe Israel starts that charge. Here's what the clip said.
Families of hostages in Israel, families of hostages are opposed to the reoccupying of Gaza. Why is the U.S. still
Well, not
supporting
all of them. And you have to understand, I'm the one that got all of the hostages out. You got a lot of people out. If it wasn't for me, they wouldn't be out.
Oh, my God. I mean, guys, it almost makes me sick to my stomach, the kind of this narcissism. You're literally talking about people that you had the idea that he had anything to do with the people that were either released or exchanged for because of the deal they were always trying to stop is just gross to me. But on top of that, that you somehow make this about you, that you're literally talking about allowing or supporting an ongoing genocide, ethnic cleansing occupation, continuation of it. And when asked about those, including the families of the people you claim you're saving that go, we don't want you to do that. You go, well, not all of them. And nobody'd be alive if we didn't do it. We saved everybody. Or I did. He says I. He talked about himself personally. I just can't even express how disgusting that is to me. Who these people are. Himself personally included in this conversation. It is so, there's just no words for it. To make that statement in the midst of this is just beyond the pale. The idea, though, is him somehow claiming that he saved all these people. The reality being very clearly that they've been trying to stop this deal every single step of the way, which, again, we'll get into it more tomorrow. The point here is that he's rationalizing. I wanted to include it just because it's, overlap to tomorrow, but also to set the table that he's completely okay with them to remove every Palestinian from Gaza. What do you think is going to go there next?
I worked with Bibi and I worked with Steve Witkoff. But if it wasn't for me, you would have all these hostages would most likely be dead right now.
Oh, okay. So if it wasn't for Trump, all the hostages would be dead? How does that even make sense? You mean because Israel's bombing everybody constantly? Well, that you could argue, yes. But the argument is that I'll go into it more tomorrow. Like, it really does just spin me out. That is so insane. It shows you that this guy, whatever the people want to claim, is just as bad as Obama and Biden and all the rest. They're sociopaths. They don't care about you. They don't care about children starving. They don't care about South Africans. They care about the agenda.
Every one of them. So they all come up here. They come in groups of 10, 12, 13, and many of them, and I've gotten to know a lot of them. They're great people. What they had to go through is incredible. But so now they have 20, but the 20 is actually probably not 20 because a couple maybe aren't around any longer. It's a terrible thing. No, I like.
Okay, what do you mean by that? So you're talking about people that have been released, okay, that are now home, and you're saying that they all come to see you, even though we've just made clear that literally all of them are supporting them ending this right now. I mean, except maybe for a single one that I could point to, but the hostages are the ones who've told you they were treated kindly, they were fed, that they sheltered them with their own bodies because Israel was bombing them. That's what they were most afraid of. I mean, to a person, guys. And they say they want you to stop. And he goes, no, it's not all of them. But then goes on to reference all of them and says that some of them may not be around anymore. What are you suggesting right there? Are you clumsily trying to suggest that Hamas killed them somehow, even though they were already released? That's probably what happened right there, to be honest. That's how his mind, he just is narrative clumsy all the time. Or are you suggesting they got killed by Israel? Or are you suggesting they took their own lives because of what Israel made them do? It's a very weird thing to say right there.
I don't like anymore. I said, when you get down to 20, they're not going to make deals anymore. And they didn't. And then I put out a statement, as you know, that was a tough statement, go in and get them. And they said, we'll give you 10, we'll give you 10. I don't know what Israel's doing, but they were willing now immediately to give us another 10.
Hey, see, guys, I mean, I'm so tired of this. He's lying. Okay, he's lying. Look into anybody, Jeremy Scahill, anybody who's constantly covering this. Are you pretending right now? Look, it's the same point I made earlier. The women in the red hats go, please, Trump, please come into Chicago. Just like the leaders of the world said, please, Trump, make a deal with me. Are you to believe now that those Hamas was going, please, Trump, we'll give you 10, please? Because you could literally prove that's not true. Doesn't it? I mean, think about how horrendously disgusting it is to not only make yourself the story about people you're killing, but also to somehow, turn this into somehow a benefit. I mean, I can't. I'm speechless. I really am. Like, what he's doing here is so far over the top to me.
Now immediately to give us another 10.
That ultimately you're claiming Hamas was willing to make a deal with you, and that somehow it just didn't spin out. They're going, please. But my point is lying about that, making up a story about somehow how you were the one making it happen when you know you're making that up about a genocide. Anyway, I'll go on forever if we keep watching this. I will talk about it more tomorrow. The point is the occupation of Gaza, right? Well, you've heard about this before. The idea, the 2030 smart city in Gaza. As Robin says, which one's Trump Tower? Now, these are just ideas. Here's another picture that was put around. Gaza 2035, a smart 15-minute city built on the mass graves of Palestinian children. Well, take a look at the image right there, or this one. These are both images that are, these are a lot of these are put out by people in Israel that are talking about this. Now, here's an interesting overlap. You know what that is right there in the background? The same thing. Except what this is a clip Donald Trump put out on True Social about the future of Gaza, right? Okay, so if we're watching this kind of background overlap of what they want the city to look like, and we can see that same futuristic backdrop in the new Gaza, maybe we should think about this being more than just a hypothetical. Never forget, Trump posted this sinister AI video of his future Riviera Gaza. Trump statues, Musk dancing, women with beards for some reason, monsters rejoicing in their genocide, and the smart Gaza city in the background in multiple examples. Here's the clip.
Donald is coming to set you free, bringing the light for all to see. No more tunnels, no more fear. Trump Gaza is...
That's weird, right? Women with beards? Is that, how does that even remotely align with the idea? Just because what the reality is, guys, it's the agenda. And I don't mean women with beards or the woke idea. It's just funny that it's about, challenging ideas. At the end of the day, this is something Trump supported. For me, the real point is about the idea of the smart city around it.
Trump Gaza shining bright.
Right there in the background.
Golden future, a brand new light. Feast and dance, the deal is done. Trump Gaza, #1.
And of course, this disgusting video that you're literally showing while people are starving to death, while you're bombing, murdering, raping, and torturing children, and this is you're on their graves dancing on this place. That's what Rob was pointing out.
Trump Gaza shining bright, golden future, a brand new light. Feast and dance, the deal is done.
Trump and Netanyahu, Trump Gaza.
Trump Gaza, #1.
Yep. Worth considering at the very least to see where clearly there's a massive transition taking place in the world. Now, I'll include these articles, which, guys, I think it's pretty obvious what I think here. The new Trump administration and the technocratic Zionist coup of the United States, or plenty of other places. Derek wrote the article, Election 2024, Zionist technocrats versus Zionist technocrats. Like, it's so clear what just went down. And either side, in quotes, it was going in the same direction. I think we can all acknowledge that now, hopefully. And I also did a recent show called The Technocratic Tiptoe. Longer one, but I think encapsulates like the real, like larger scope picture of what technocratic tiptoe looks like. And of course, True Street Media says, quote, some people would rather cheer on America turning into a techno-feudal military police state that even Orwell wasn't creative enough to dream up, rather than admit they got played so we can unite and fight back. Mark Twain, possibly disputed. They're joking, obviously. The point is just clearly people are just so desperate to not want to be wrong that they're allowing the destruction of whatever they believe in, allowing a technocratic police state, everything we think we're fighting for. My point is, I'm not talking about the screaming morons at the top of the paradigm. There's a huge, a majority in my mind of conservatives who are good people who want good things, that are either afraid to speak up, who don't, their voices aren't being heard, or they just maybe somehow still think this is better than the alternative. Wake up. I know you see it. You are standing with us, with everybody else, left and right, Christian, Jew, and Muslim, and whatever else, people who care about the future. Stop allowing yourself to be divided by these arbitrary lines. Yes, we have differences. Yes, people have different opinions. The truth is, the real dividing factor is the people trying to control your life. So I'm going to leave you with a clip. Shout out to this Reddit page that somebody sent me, Techno-Feudalism. And it's a video that somebody put together using AI. It's the image that we used. Now it's kind of it's a little bit gamey, like you're watching a video game, but it's really, really well done. The way this is painted, not just the video, listen to it. The words that are being used. This is the techno-feudal state, is what this is showing. Not just like literally as if we went back into some kind of serfdom, feudal, like peasant medieval time, living in straw huts and that kind of thing. In the background, they've got their massive technocratic, Emerald City, if you will. And it's important to think about, guys, that and it's an extreme hyperbolic version of it, right? But maybe not. The reality is we're being driven in this direction. Maybe this is 100 years, 200 years, maybe it's 5 years away. Who knows? All I want you to do is consider not just the hyperbolic framing, but the idea that it's presenting. The idea that we're being driven into a place where, based on things we think we care about, we're being isolated, divided, shoved into a smaller and smaller, less free and less free, lacking of liberty situation every single moment. And it's all, based on you care about this or you care about that, or making this city safer for you, when none of that's actually what's happening, at least in my opinion. So I just hope that you can consider this at the very least. So thank you for tuning in. I can't stress how important I think this is. Not just the, government transition, but the deep, the deep-seated, long-term, ties. Going back a very long way. Like we could, I could go into this in a large way and go back to, go back before World War II even. Like go back to the conversation of where a lot of this eugenic stuff started. A lot of this, even the technocratic ink point. You can clearly see this has been a long time coming. And okay, let's just even say I'm wrong about what's currently happening. The reality of this agenda is just, it's as obvious as Zionism, but also as dismissed, which is interesting. Says a lot, I think. But I'll leave it there for today. I'll see you tomorrow. I got plenty more to talk about, but I'm going to leave you with this clip that I hope you'll pay attention to and consider a future that they're building. Thank you for tuning in. I love you all. As always, question everything. Come to your own conclusions. Stay vigilant.
Blockchain tithes paid here. Convert your labor to tokens.
AI servants certified by the Nexus Corps. Efficiency guarantee.
All data extracted belongeth to the Lords.
Get your AI license. Get priority access to higher tier automation. Smart contract assured.
Privacy is heresy. Salvation lies in obedience. The algorithm will provide for the faithful.
AI servants, neural sync implants, blockchain access keys.
Water rations, freshly filtered.
All shall be transparent before the eye of the code. Thou shalt accept the updates of the great system without hesitation.
Trust in the system. Obedience brings stability. Defiance will not be tolerated.
We bow to the new order. The AI sees all. The AI is all.
Damn right. The King's will is law. The AI enforces it.
Dark clouds gather, my lord. Thy prompt shall command.
Release the hypno-drones.
The burden of thought has poisoned mankind. The old world led to ruin. Embrace simplicity. Embrace balance. The system provides all you need. Those who submit shall ascend. Your mind is the last frontier. Let us cleanse it of chaos. Open your neural pathways and receive clarity.
We are not data. The algorithm lies. Liberty is offline. We take back our fate.